And I apologize if I say I apologize. I run a criminal trial, and so used to saying plaintiff, I'm used to saying people. So if I apologize if I do that in advance. So all right, why don't we start with the plaintiffs? Are there any motions in limine?
Yes, good afternoon, Your Honor. First of all, before we talk about motions, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kevin Heckman. If I could have my co-counsel introduce herself.
Yes, good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Deja Gordon.
Your Honor, together we represent the plaintiff for the people in this matter, Mr. Jackie Ayers. Once the plaintiff has finished with their appearances, we do not have any motions in limine. However, we do have a few preliminary matters to take up with the court outside the presence of the jury.
All right, and the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Ian Rawlinson here on behalf of Hitchcock Studios. We do have a couple housekeeping matters as well as a few motions to exclude to address.
Okay, so actually, I should have done this at the very beginning. I'm bad with introductions, but I should have introduced myself. So my name is Tony Cho. I am a judge in the Los Angeles County Superior Court. I'm assigned to the Torrance Courthouse. As I previously mentioned, I'm assigned to a criminal calendar court. And so so I do criminal trials. I'm actually just finishing up one right now. We finished closing arguments on Friday, and so the jury has it. That's I've been a judge for about now about 3 years now, so still fairly new to this, but I've done a few trials, but it's nice to meet you all, and hopefully this will be I'm sure this is going to be a great experience. Let's see. So there are some, before we get into the motions, why don't we take care of some housekeeping matters? Is there any housekeeping matters that I think the both sides said there were? So why don't we start with the plaintiff? You have any housekeeping matters you'd like to address right now?
Yes, Your Honor. First of all, would the court like a brief summary of the case?
I've read the packet that we have, but sure.
So, Your Honor, today the plaintiff brings forward the claim of wrongful death by way of negligence. By way of background, in 2019, the defendant started filming a movie about the life of musician Kurt Cobain from the band Nirvana. Cobain was a well-known heroin addict that died as a result of his heroin use. And now the defendant is a filmmaker, and he hired the decedent, Mr. Ernest Ayers, to play the role of Kurt Cobain. However, Ernest Ayers, the decedent, was also a heroin addict. And it's the plaintiff's theory that the defendant knew of Mr. Ayers' prior use and used his influence as a big-time Hollywood director to have him what's called method act as a heroin addict in this Cobain film, which eventually led to Mr. Ernest Ayers' overdose and his death in June of 2020.
All right, and
further, Your Honor, just some other preliminary matters. It's the plaintiff's understanding that the federal rules of civil procedure as well as the federal rules of evidence apply in today's case.
that's my understanding.
And we'd like to inform the court that all the plaintiff's exhibits have been pre-marked and are at the clerk's table.
Okay.
And additionally, Your Honor, there are some stipulated pre-admitted exhibits, as well as a couple that the parties agreed to in pre-trial conference. As to the stipulated in the packet, those are going to be exhibits 2, 6, 12, and 13.
2, 6, 12, and 13 are stipped. All right.
Yes, Your Honor. And the parties agreed to pre-admit exhibits 1, 3, and 8 in their pretrial conference, our pretrial conference.
Okay.
And Your Honor, is it your preference that we ask to publish these pre-admitted exhibits, or would you like us to do so at our leisure and convenience whenever we see fit?
You can do it at your leisure.
And Your Honor, just kind of generally, we understand that COVID's a tough time over this past year and a half, and these Zoom trials like to, they kind of go north and south as they want to. So if whatever time you see me moving weird and the tech doesn't go as strong, you can't hear me, just interject, and this goes for opposing counsel as well. And we'll do our best to backtrack and try to rephrase whatever testimony or line of questioning the jurors and you have not heard. And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff, oh, excuse me, one last thought. We would like the court's permission to publish 2 exhibits during Ms. Gordon's opening remarks.
Okay, and which of the 2 exhibits are those?
Your Honor, those are going to be exhibits 1 and 8.
Okay. All right, and the defense has already agreed to pre-admit those evidence, so there's no objection, I would imagine.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. All
And with
right.
that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Okay, and defense, any housekeeping matters or preliminary matters you'd like to address?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff's counsel has addressed any housekeeping matters that we needed to address. We just have a few motions to exclude to bring up, Your Honor.
All right, so why don't we go over those one by one?
Okay. Yes, Your Honor. So the first motion deals with statements we anticipate the plaintiffs to offer from Jackie Ayer's testimony. The first being a lunch in July of 2018 with Avery Hitchcock that Ernest Ayers told Mr. Hitchcock that he was a recovering addict and he can't use again. This can be found on page 31 of the case packet, lines 1 through 4. And Your Honor, we simply object these statements as hearsay.
All right. Plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. These statements will not be used for the truth of the matter asserted. Therefore, they are not going to be considered hearsay under Federal Rules of Evidence 801. The testimony is going to be that Hitchcock did this to Ernest. We're not eliciting these statements from a witness to show that he did or didn't physically make Ernest use heroin. However, it's going to be the effects of the listener showing that Mr. Avery Hitchcock, he had knowledge of Ernest Ayer's prior addiction and his prior use with heroin, and it put him on notice as to who he was hiring as his main role in this Kurt Cobain film.
Okay, so before we get there, just so that I know that I don't know the record, obviously, as well as the existing transcripts and the depositions as well as you do. So you said it was on page 31 of the packet, lines 1 through 4?
Yes, I believe so, Your Honor. It's let's see here. It continues on to page 31, lines 1 through 4.
Okay.
There.
It's the question I have at 21 on page 30. It's question, what was discussed about Ernest's addictions? Avery said, Avery said, how do you feel about method acting? Ernest said, I'm not a method actor. I act by finding the character's motivation, not trying to live like them. Avery said, I would like you to try the method here. Ernest said, Kurt Cobain was a heroin addict. Avery said, I understand. Ernest and I looked at each other. Ernest said to Avery, I'm a recovering heroin addict myself. I know, Avery said, I know. It's one reason I knew you could nail the role. And so is it that one line? That's the one line that you're asking to exclude?
Yes, Your Honor. The response from Ernest saying, I'm a recovering heroin addict myself, and next from Ernest saying, I can't use again. We just object to these statements as hearsay, and if Your Honor, I may respond to the plaintiff counsel's argument.
All right, sorry, and I interrupted the plaintiff's argument. So, Mr. Heckman, if you would like to continue.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly, just looking at the statement again, the statement of I'm a recovering heroin addict myself, we believe in good faith we'll get this testimony of Mr. Ernest's prior use through other witnesses. This statement itself will, against Mr. Avery Hitchcock, will be shown that Mr. Hitchcock was put on notice and that he had knowledge of Ernest Ayer's prior use of heroin in 2016. Therefore, it's not being used for the truth, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Rawlinson.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff counsel's whole allegations today are that Mr. Hitchcock did know about a prior addiction. Therefore, this statement has to be used for the truth of the matter asserted, whether it's for notice or not. So this statement is, regardless of whether it's being used for notice or knowledge, it's being used for the truth of the matter asserted.
Well, I would respectfully disagree. The motion is to exclude is respectfully denied. The motion, it does not appear that it's being used for the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter, the statement, if it were, then it would be information that the person is a heroin addict. I don't. I think, again, as Mr. Heckman said, it's being offered at that point so that the listener becomes aware that he's a heroin addict. So the motion to exclude is denied. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor.
There were other motions to exclude. Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Just two more instances within Jackie Ayer's testimony that we have. And then after that, we have just a couple instances in Chandler Matz's testimony, just to keep you informed. Your Honor, the next line of testimony that we move to exclude is on page 34 of Jackie Ayer's testimony, lines 21 to 26, and then the last word of that testimony continues on to the next page in line 1.
Okay.
We move to exclude the testimony of Jackie Ayer's stating that Ernest told her there was a syringe on my table, looks like it's full of heroin, and Avery must have put it in my trailer. We object to these statements as hearsay. And furthermore, the fact that Ernest Ayers said that it was full of heroin and that Avery left it there are entirely speculative, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Heckman?
Yes, Your Honor. Looking at these statements on page 34 of the record, if we just look a couple lines up to 21, Ernest Ayers said this statement to his husband, Jackie Ayers, quote, when he walked into his trailer on set, he just stopped talking. For those reasons, Your Honor, this is an expression of a present sense impression or a statement describing or explaining a current condition in this case. Mr. Ayers is on the phone with his husband and he's stating exactly what he sees the moment that he walks into his trailer. For that reason, these statements are an exception to the hearsay under 803(1).
Okay, Mr. Rawlinson, would you like to respond?
Yes, Your Honor. We just simply re-urge our hearsay objection and re-urge that regardless, the statement that the syringe was full of heroin and that Avery had left it there entirely speculative. He looked at the syringe and said it was full of heroin, not knowing exactly what was in it. And he had never seen Avery Hitchcock go into his trailer to put those things there. He was speculating as to these matters, Your Honor.
Okay, so the issue of, and this was to Mr. Heckman, so I would agree with you that the statement, there is a syringe on the table in my trailer. I'm looking at a syringe full of, it looks like heroin. Up to that point, I would agree with you. It's a statement, it's contemporaneous with his observations. So the next line, which is Avery must have put the heroin in my trailer, and there's a note, and there's a note on the napkin. That's all fine. The line that I would have issue with is Avery must have put heroin in my trailer. That is, without more, wholly speculative at that point, and so that might be inappropriate. And would you like to respond to that, Mr. Heckman?
Yes, Your Honor. And these discussions, they're tough to look at in a vacuum. And this statement, Avery must have put the heroin in my trailer, will be corroborated by other witnesses and other testimony throughout the trial today, which will corroborate this fact that Avery put this syringe within the trailer of Ernest Ayers. And there's going to be statements from other people, although not direct, where Avery Hitchcock will take the stand and say that he put it there. However, it will be indirect and circumstantial evidence, which will make this more probable than not that Avery Hitchcock did do this. And it's a vital part of the case today, Your Honor.
Okay. And so I guess it does seem speculative. I see the note, that's going to be Exhibit 8, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. My inclination would be to admit the statement with redacting the speculative portion, which is Avery must have put it in my trailer, but otherwise the statement can come in.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. One more instance from Jackie Iris' testimony that we would like to address. This is on page 36 of the packet, lines 15 to 26. So this is a phone conversation that Jackie.
I'm sorry, what was the, still getting to it. What was the page in line?
I apologize, Your Honor. Page 36,
Uh-huh.
lines 15 to 26.
Okay. Go
And
ahead.
this was a phone conversation, Your Honor, that Jackie Iris had with Ernest Iris. In this conversation, Ernest admits that he is using heroin again and that he said Avery Hitchcock was making him. And to provide context for Avery Hitchcock making him, Ernest Ayers explains the previous occasions where he found a note and syringe in his trailer. We have no issue with the statement that he was using heroin again. It is a then existing mental, physical, emotional condition, but we do object to he said Avery Hitchcock was making him as an inadmissible hearsay.
All right, Mr. Heckman.
Yes, Your Honor, although this may ordinarily be hearsay, yet again, we have another exception to hearsay. This time it's going to be 802.2, an excited utterance. And again, if we just look a little bit further up in the deposition, we see on line 9, I was on the phone with Ernest. I was crying. Ernest started crying too. He was sobbing and he told me the truth. Your Honor, this has inherent trustworthiness based upon its excited utterance. This was an event that was startling and a stressful environment for both the listener and the declarant in this instant. For that reason, it falls under Federal Rules of Evidence 803.2, being an excited utterance from Mr. Ernest Ayers.
All right, Mr. Rawlinson.
Yes, Your Honor. I would just like to point out that throughout their phone conversations with Jackie and Ernest, this was the third time she had asked if he was using heroin again. And furthermore, he's explaining past occurrences. When he says that Avery Hitchcock was making him use, he's explaining how on June 5th, and this phone call was on June 19th, he's explaining on June 5th, the note and syringe were left there, a previous conversation that he had with Mr. Hitchcock. So any excited utterance or being under the emotional stress that is past, Your Honor.
Okay. And I don't believe this is an excited utterance for the purposes of the definition of an excited utterance. This is it's an emotional conversation, but he's not under the emotions of an event per se, but rather than of him using heroin, which is not an excited it's not an event that would have caused him to be this under this kind of emotion. But otherwise, it's not an excited utterance. So that statement will otherwise be excluded. Up to the point of I think I scrolled up too high. The portions where it says that Avery's making him use it will be excluded. Anything else?
Your Honor, my co-counsel will address, I apologize, Your Honor. I have one more motion to address with Chandler Matz. So in Chandler Matz's testimony, page 45 of the case packet, lines 11 and 12. Chandler Matz says in an answer to, you've continued to work in Avery's films. He says, yes, I did, but not after what I saw during Cobain. What Avery did to this kid was criminal. Ernest is dead because of Avery. Your Honor, we move to exclude this statement as an improper opinion by a lay witness. It's not rationally perceived by Chandler Matz.
All right. And is it still you, Mr. Heckman, or is it going to be your co-counsel? It's okay. All right, Mr. Heckman. It's okay. So your response?
Could I just ask, Your Honor, where that page in line was?
Those 45 question is on line 10, and then it goes, answer goes through 11 and 12. You continue to work in Avery's films. Yes, I did. Yes, but not after what I saw during Cobain. What Avery did to the kid was criminal. Ernest is dead because of Avery.
Yeah, yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff does not intend on eliciting these statements as are written here in its deposition. So we have no opposition to that motion.
All right, so the motion to exclude that statement is granted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I apologize. I know we just want to take care of all these matters to not disrupt the flow of trial, but my co-counsel Joanna Hughes just has one more motion with regard to Chandler Matz's testimony.
Of course.
Hi, good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hughes.
Our final motion to exclude, as my co-counsel just stated, is statements from Chandler Matz as well. Your Honor, you can find a little bit lengthy, so I'm happy to give you a summary, but they can be found on page 43,
Okay.
lines 13 through 17.
43, 13 through 17. Okay.
And then additionally, Your Honor, page 44, lines 8 through 18.
Okay.
Your Honor, those specific testimony includes 4 examples of method acting, which is an acting technique employed by Mr. Hitchcock. Those 4 examples regard an actor who lost weight to play a character who had been captured, encouraging an actor to do his own stunt, which was jumping out of a moving car, an actor whose character was living in the woods, encouraging that actor to actually live in the woods, and finally, an actor who is a vegetarian, encouraging that actor to eat meat. Your Honor, we would ask that these 4 specific examples be excluded today. First, they are not relevant under 401, and additionally, any relevancy that there is far outweighed by the prejudice and should be excluded under 403. Finally, Your Honor, we also seek to exclude this testimony under 404 as we believe it's solely being offered to show propensity.
Mr. Heckman.
Yes, Your Honor. Do a lot of flipping in this book for this one. I'm going to take this 3-tiered, if you will. I'm going to do it backwards, though. As far as the 404 character argument, I at least didn't hear a character trait that was being elicited for propensity purposes. However, in the event that there is a character trait at issue here, as far as Mr. Avery Hitchcock, it would be excluded under 404B2 that these prior method acting experiences, it shows that he has knowledge and his motive to what he really wants out of his actors. And that's a permitted use of character under 404B2, Your Honor. And then further, the 403 argument, as far as this is prejudicial, in order for something to be prejudicial, as I'm sure you're well aware, it needs to substantially outweigh its probative value. The plaintiff needs to lay the foundation of what method acting is, and we do this through experience and testimony of our witnesses. Specifically, one of our actors did method acting with Mr. Hitchcock in the past. It's not going to be prejudicial to the defense as much as they may not like the testimony. That doesn't make it prejudicial in a sense. And the relevance of this, as I'm sure you're well aware, it's more makes a fact or consequence more probable than not. Mr. Avery Hitchcock is going to take the stand. He's going to say he likes method acting. He's going to say he's a fierce believer in method acting. Therefore, anything about method acting is going to be relevant in the case today.
All right, Ms. Hughes.
Yes, Your Honor, if I can just respond specifically to the 403. As plaintiff's counsel just mentioned, we are going to hear from Mr. Hitchcock that he used method acting. We're also going to hear from 2 other witnesses today that Mr. Hitchcock used method acting. And there are many different ways to show what counsel points out as the relevancy of this matter. So therefore, these 4 examples are being used for the prejudice to prey on the jury's emotions, pointing out these specific, more extreme, instead of just using basic examples that they have an opportunity to use.
Okay. So as it relates to whether it's more probative or prejudicial, I think it is more probative than prejudicial. So I think it does go into his modus operandi, which is permissible. And so the only issue I would have, the only question, I don't know if it's in the packet or not, is are these what is the witness's foundation in for the basis of knowledge of these examples? Is it something that the witness witnessed personally, or is it something that the witness knows about just in general from rumors, or are these incidents something that is publicly known because it's published in the news or media and Variety magazine or whatever the case may be? So what's the foundation for the witness's knowledge for these?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may, one of the examples is going to come through a witness, Mr. Chandler Matz, the one found specifically on page 44.
Mhm.
That's going to be an example of method acting in which he actually himself did method acting. So it's not going to be mere conjecture or rumors. He went through this, he did this. As far as the other examples, it's actually going to come through the defendant of Mr. Avery Hitchcock, in which he had knowledge of what method acting is because he's done it in the past. And there's several examples, Your Honor, where it shows the inherent danger of what method acting is and how dangerous it can be. There's no character trait at issue. These examples on 43 are Hitchcock films and Avery Hitchcock directed films. Again, not conjecture, not rumors. And we're bringing them forward to show what Mr. Avery Hitchcock, his purpose of method acting,
And I would agree with you, and I am agreeing that those are acceptable means of doing that. That is information that is, I think, again, more probative than prejudicial. But the issue is these incidents. What I mean is, what is the foundation? What is the basis of knowledge, of the witness's knowledge? So it's, if the evidence is going to come through the defendant himself, that's fine. But this is a transcript of who's the witness that's testifying in this case, in this deposition? It is Chandler Matz. How does if Mr. Matz is going to testify about these other incidents, what is the foundation, or what is the basis of Mr. Matz's knowledge about this? Is it publicly known? And so Mr. Matz can testify as to something that everybody in the industry knows about, that Mr. Because it's in, like, again, in newspapers or in TMZ, it's been published, it's been reported on, or things like that? Or is it something that Mr. Matz has personally seen? He's seen Mr. Hitchcock tell these other actors to do these other things. So that's what it is. That's why I'm asking. So, because it's potentially a hearsay issue, because if he's heard about these incidents from other people, then it's hearsay. If it's something that he saw, then it's appropriate witness testimony because he's seen it. And so that's what I was wondering about.
Yes, Your Honor. Specifically, there's two examples again on page 44 in which Chandler Matz was a part of two of Avery Hitchcock's prior films. South by Southwest is one, and To Catch a Crook is the other. These two examples of method acting are what he saw while he was on set. It's not through TMZ, it's not through a newspaper. He was there when he put these actors through these method acting techniques.
Okay. And for if that's the case, then I think those incidents are admissible. So the motion to exclude those incidents would be denied. Anything
Your
else?
Honor, just to clarify then, the other two examples that he did not have personal knowledge of, are those then excluded?
Those would be excluded, and I think it's because it doesn't say what movies in the deposition. It doesn't say what movies they're from. So yes, that would be excluded. Those two would be excluded.
And with that, we have nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you for your patience.
All right. Anything else?
Nothing further from the plaintiff, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed to opening statements.
Okay. All right. So what do we do? Mr. Bailiff, what do we do? Do we have the, do you bring them in, or how does that work?
Yes, Your Honor. They will bring the jury in momentarily, and then we can get rolling. Once the jury and the attorney evaluators appear to be here, I'll ask them to turn on their cameras so that I can confirm that they're all present, and then we'll get the go-ahead to move forward with opening statements.
Great. Okay, let me find my script. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, just let me know when everybody's here. And just so that what we'll do is when we start the opening statements, I'm going to turn my camera off just so that it's less distracting for our jurors. They can just pay attention to the attorneys as they do their opening statement. So don't think that I'm leaving and walking away while you guys are doing your opening statement or anything. All right. Just let me know when everyone's here. Just out of curiosity, by the way, is there a break in between that's scheduled, or is there no breaks? How does that go?
Yes, Your Honor. We recommend between cases in chief to give about a 5-minute break. And then
Okay.
again, at the end of defense case in chief, about a 5-minute break before closings.
Okay, great.
Your Honor, did anybody else just get a notification that this breakout room's ending?
Yes, we are checking with the tournament directors to find out what is happening.
Oh, good, thank you.
Okay.
We'll get it. Hey, everybody, it looks like the breakout rooms just closed. Don't know why that happened. We're going to fix that and get them reset up. In fact, it looks like, let's see, is it all ready to go?
All right. Thank you. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody into our virtual courtroom. Thank you. I am calling the case of Ayers versus Hitchcock Studios. Can the parties please make their appearances?
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. I'm Kevin Heckman on behalf of the plaintiff, Mr. Jackie Ayers.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Deja Gordon on behalf of the plaintiff.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Ian Rawlinson, here appearing on behalf of Hitchcock Studios.
Good afternoon. My name is Joanna Hughes on behalf of the defendant Hitchcock Studios.
All right. We will now hear opening statements.
Yes, Your Honor.
Before the plaintiff begins, we now recommend that everyone click that view button in the top right and make sure to set to speaker.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. You have to. This is a role of a lifetime. We both know that I can find someone who will. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the defendant. It's 2018. For Ernest, this year was the beginning of the end. This is the year that Ernest will begin to experience the overwhelming and undeniable influence of the defendant. We'll come to find that the defendant hires Ernest for a lead acting role in his film Cobain, not so much for his abilities, but for his vulnerabilities. He hires him to method act. Now, let me just take a second to explain to you what method acting is. Method acting is controversial, lethal, and unnecessarily dangerous. It's a form of acting where the character mirrors the life of the person that they are portraying. And in our case, that person was Kurt Cobain. It was this method acting, coupled with the defendant's influence, that caused the death of Ernest Ayers. But before I get to that, I want to talk to you about what brought us to this very moment. We're in Manhattan, New York, at the Olympic Flame restaurant. And if you know anything about New York, you know that the Olympic Flame was the fanciest restaurant in Manhattan. It's the kind of restaurant that everyday people have to save up to go to. And Ernest, he was an everyday person. For him, this was a moment that he had waited his entire life. So as Ernest sits at this table, overlooking Manhattan and the life that he could only dream of, in walks one of the most well-known men in the country. On one side of the table, you have an industry icon, a man whose films have grossed more than $6 billion worldwide. This man is an Oscar nominee. He's been voted the most influential person in the world. And on the other side of the table, we have Ernest, a journeyman entertainer, by no one's standards a star. And sitting at this table with Ernest isn't his lawyer, not even his agent. It's his spouse, Jackie. The defendant comes into this meeting and he's told all about Ernest's abilities and his vulnerabilities. He learns that Ernest has only ever acted in small off-Broadway productions. He's a struggling actor. He's never been on a major film set before, let alone been the lead in a major film. He learns about Ernest's addiction. Now, the defendant knows that he has the power to take all of this and transform Ernest's life. You're gonna see that he does just that, just not in the way that anyone ever expected. This man, this defendant, is Mr. Avery Hitchcock. The defendant is prepared to offer Ernest a chance of a lifetime, despite his vulnerabilities, a chance to play the lead in a film depicting the life of the late and great megastar, Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain's celebrity is well known, and this is a heavy experience for an inexperienced theater actor. What's also well known is that Kurt Cobain was a heroin addict. The defendant opens up his briefcase and drops the weight of the world on that table. A contract, a lifetime contract worth $500,000. This type of money is monumental to Ernest. So as he sits at this table, he makes the choice that he thinks will change his life. A choice that turns out not to be a choice at all, because this money, it becomes a source of control and influence for the defendant. And through this influence and this control, the defendant, he presents Ernest with heroin as a form of method acting. Now, after 3 years of sobriety, the defendant reacquaints Ernest with an old demon, heroin. Ernest succumbs to his addiction and his life spirals out of control. On Ernest's very last day on this earth, his husband Jackie books a flight to save him, but he's too late. Because as Jackie flies from New York to California, the very last effects of the defendant's method are draining the life out of Ernest. Jackie opens the door, and before he can even walk in, he sees any spouse's worst nightmare. He finds Ernest, unconscious, alone. Lying next to him, a syringe of heroin. Jackie runs to Ernest, falls to the floor, and touches his cold, lifeless skin. He calls for help, but he knows he's too late. Ernest has already taken his last breath, losing his battle against addiction and the battle against the method of the defendant. And that's why we're here today. Members of the jury, it's our burden to prove to each and every one of you that it was Avery Hitchcock, the defendant's negligence, that caused, at least partially, the death of Ernest Ayers. Now, negligence is failing to act in a way that a reasonable person would under the same or similar circumstances to prevent harm to themselves or others. And today we'll hear of at least 2 examples of dangerous method acting that took place on the defendant's set. You'll hear of an actor passing out as a result of losing so much weight for the method. You'll hear of another actor with no training, required to perform his own stunts. That same actor required to jump nearly 80 feet out of a moving vehicle. You'll hear that the defendant asked Ernest to employ those same dangerous methods to method act on this film to portray Kurt Cobain. How does he do this? By reintroducing Ernest to a highly addictive and lethal drug, heroin. On June 5th, 2019, an impressionable and easily manipulated young actor is pushed and prodded to refilm a scene 62 times. 62 times in front of a large audience as he is ridiculed and critiqued by the defendant. 62 times until he can't take it anymore. He walks to his trailer, he opens the door to be confronted with a syringe. Members of the jury, this wasn't just any syringe. You'll come to find that this syringe was full of heroin and it was left on top of a note. You'll come to find that this note gave Ernest a number to a local drug dealer with all of the means and opportunity to pay for those drugs. Now, at this point, folks, we know that Ernest is a recovering heroin addict, and addiction with no fuel, that would have just been another day of recovery for Ernest. But Avery Hitchcock, he fueled this addiction, causing Ernest Ayers' death. Members of the jury, I can't tell you what the defense will come up here and say today, but what they may try to say is that Avery Hitchcock didn't strap Ernest down. He didn't take his arm and load up a syringe of heroin and inject it into Ernest's arm. No, but what Avery did do is give Ernest a loaded gun and push him to shoot. Today, you will also hear about the defendant's many threats. You're gonna hear that Ernest goes to the defendant in horrendous condition. He tells him that he can't continue to method act. He can't continue to use heroin. The defendant's response? We both know that I can find someone who will. You're gonna learn that this wasn't just a situation of a little peer pressure. This was a man of influence, power, and prestige telling his employee that you will use heroin. No, you have to use heroin or you're fired. The weeks progress. Ernest's condition declines. He becomes weak. He becomes ill. He becomes one with the method. The defendant, he opens up a Pandora's box to all of Ernest's demons and he turns the other way because Ernest has become one with the method, and that's more than enough. The defendant turns the other way, watches Ernest decline, watches Ernest die. Members of the jury, at the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Mr. Heckman, will come before you one last time. And he'll tell you that Avery Hitchcock, he hired Ernest, not for his ability, but for his vulnerability. And when you hear that, I'm confident that you will find Mr. Avery Hitchcock liable for the death of Ernest Ayers.
All right, thank you. Defense, you may present your opening argument, opening statements.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. May it please the court. Good afternoon, members of the jury. My name is Ian Rawlinson, and I, along with my co-counsel, Joanna Hughes, represent Hitchcock Studios in today's case. It wasn't the director, it was the disease. Ernest Ayers gave into this disease, and it's what led to his death. Now, we recognize this is a tragedy. Losing a loved one under any circumstance is devastating. But plaintiff's counsel want you to believe that this case is about a director who forced an actor to take heroin. In reality, and the evidence will show you, that this case is about a man who had an addiction and he relapsed. Now, this addiction started back near the beginning of Ernest's career. Back in 2014, he graduated from Tisch School of the Arts in New York, and he was ready to become a big-time actor. But it wasn't going to be easy. There were so many other actors in this business trying to make it. So Mr. Ayers hires a talent agent, Miss Goldman, who you'll hear from today. She helped him get some off-Broadway roles, commercials, nothing major. And by 2016, his friends and his family started to notice a change. His spouse, Jackie Ayers, noticed that he wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating. He was vomiting and he had major mood swings. Even his talent agent, Miss Golddiamond, noticed that he was starting to miss auditions. That's when they finally realized that the stress of his so far unsuccessful career led him to heroin. Now, his friends and family wanted to help, so they organized an intervention for him. And at this intervention, Ernest said that he wanted to stop, but he couldn't. But he knew he needed to seek help, and he did. He checked into a rehab center recommended by Miss Golddiamond, who you'll hear from, and he got clean. He beat the disease, he beat the addiction, but it was an ongoing battle. He went to regular Narcotics Anonymous meetings. He got a sponsor. He didn't have a sip of wine for 3 years. That's all because a disease like this, it never really goes away. Now, fast forward a couple years, Ernest lands the role of a lifetime. Kurt Cobain in the movie Cobain by Hitchcock Studios. He had never had anything this big before. But it wasn't going to be easy. That you heard about that first day of shooting, the 62 scenes that Mr. Ayers had to shoot because he just couldn't get it right. He had never had a role of this caliber before. Now, let me tell you what really happened after the shooting of those scenes. Ernest went back to his trailer. The first day of shooting after those 62 scenes devastated. He was nervous, he was anxious, and Mr. Hitchcock went to check on him. Mr. Hitchcock wanted to make sure that everything was okay, and he went and he apologized. He said he shouldn't have started him on a scene that difficult. It was a scene later on in Kurt Cobain's career. They could come back to it. In response, Ernest Ayers asked for some good weed. Wanting to help, Mr. Hitchcock gave him that note, the note that said, "To find Kurt, you must let Ernest go." And a phone number to a marijuana dealer to help Mr. Ayers get this good weed that he asked for. But members of the jury, weed was not what Ernest's addiction craved. His disease, unfortunately, required more. That's why behind closed doors, offset, with no one else around but Ernest's own free will, he injected that syringe full of heroin into his arm. And it ultimately led to his death. Now, this case hinges on who's responsible. I anticipate that you'll be asked whether the negligence of Hitchcock Studios caused Ernest Ayers' death, or whether it was also Ernest Ayers' own negligence. The plaintiff has the burden to prove to you that it is more likely true than not true that Hitchcock Studios was negligent. And negligence simply asks whether an act or a failure to act is reasonable or unreasonable under the same circumstances. Members of the jury, plaintiff's counsel will not be able to show you today that Mr. Hitchcock gave Ernest Ayers a syringe directly. They will not be able to provide you with any direct evidence of that. What everyone will agree on today is that Ernest Ayers had a disease. He had an addiction. This disease is what's to blame. Now, you'll hear from Mr. Hitchcock himself. He'll tell you that he never knew of Ernest Ayers' heroin addiction until after he passed. And that first day of shooting, after those 62 scenes, he did go to Ernest's trailer. He wanted to help him. He didn't leave a note or a syringe for Ernest. You'll also hear from Ms. Goldtham, Ernest's talent agent. She's the one who initially helped him in 2016 and recommended that rehab center. And when she came to visit him in 2019 on the set of Cobain, she saw no signs of what she saw before back in 2016. Now, I anticipate you'll also hear from Jackie Ayers. Now, when you listen to his testimony, I want you to focus closely on the circumstances surrounding Ernest's addiction from 2016 and why he became addicted in the first place. Members of the jury, as I said, this is a tragedy. But the reality is, Ernest fought day by day to keep this disease at bay. It wasn't the director. It was this disease. That's why at the end of this trial, we ask that you find Hitchcock Studios not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the plaintiff may call their first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Jackie Ayers to the stand. I see her bailiffs popped up.
Yes, before you proceed with questioning the first witness, at this time, we recommend that everyone switch to gallery view, which is found by clicking the view button in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Let me know if you have any questions.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ayers. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Jackie Ayers.
Now, I know this is a difficult day, but can you tell us why you're here today?
Because my husband, Ernest Ayers, he died from a drug overdose while working on Avery Hitchcock's movie, Cobain.
Calling court and counsel's attention to what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 2. Mr. Heckman, may you please publish Exhibit 2 for the jury? Mr. Ayers, up to the top left, what is that a picture of?
That's a picture of my Ernest. He was so handsome then.
Can you describe your life with Ernest?
Yeah, we met as young college kids at NYU, and then we got married in 2016. And at first we lived a pretty humble lifestyle. We weren't making too much money at the time, so we did what we had to do to make ends meet. It was great going through life with him.
Thank you, Mr. Heckman. I want to talk about Ernest's career. After graduating from NYU, what did Ernest do?
Well, he graduated from NYU School Performing Arts, so he went to school to be an actor. And when he graduated, he just continued down that career path and started working as an actor.
Did you know all of the acting gigs that Ernest had?
Yep, I was right there by his side for all of them.
What kind of gigs were they?
Well, first it was pretty small roles, TV ads, radio ads, and he eventually worked himself up to off-Broadway shows, and he's getting some pretty good roles in theater, and he had one role as barista number 2 in a film, but that was pretty much the extent of his career.
Now, just for those of us who don't know, what are off-Broadway roles?
Off-Broadway they're theater performances, but they're not on Broadway street. They're literally off-Broadway shows.
Now, in 2016, what work did Ernest do?
No, 2016, that was a tough year for us. Ernest, he was suffering from an addiction in that year, so unfortunately he didn't have any work.
Can we talk about that time a little bit? What was Ernest like when he was using heroin in 2016?
It was awful. He had mood swings. He was hardly sleeping anymore, and he ended up missing a lot of his auditions, which is why he didn't have any roles. But thankfully he got clean. He went to rehab and he got back into the swing of things and started acting again.
Now, once he started acting again, what kind of things did Ernest do next?
Oh, the biggest thing that he did next was the Cobain film.
How did he get the Cobain role?
Avery Hitchcock came to New York in 2018, and he had lunch with us and offered Ernest this role to play Kurt Cobain.
In 2018, let me ask you, what did you know about Mr. Avery Hitchcock?
Oh, everyone knows who Avery Hitchcock is. I mean, he's one of the biggest producers in Hollywood. But I didn't know him personally at that time. That was the first time I'd met him. And I knew that he liked method acting for his movies.
Before we get too far, what's method acting?
It's when you immerse yourself in a role and you play the role as the character that you're portraying. You quite literally mirror the life of the person that you're playing as.
And how'd you feel about that?
Well, I was concerned at first. Ernest was playing Kurt Cobain, a well-known music icon and the lead singer of Nirvana, but Kurt was also a heroin addict, and Avery knew this, and he was asking Ernest to method act and stare directly into the face of heroin again.
Now, what did Avery say about Ernest's addiction?
He said it was one of the reasons that he knew Ernest could nail the role.
Now, talking about that role a little bit, did Ernest sign a contract for this role?
Yeah, he did.
When was his contract signed?
Ernest signed that contract the same day that Avery took us to the Blue Flame. I think it was July 7th.
And while at the restaurant, was anyone else at this lunch with you to look over this contract?
No, Ernest's agent wasn't there, and our lawyer wasn't there either.
Call important counsel's attention to what has been pre-admitted as Exhibit 3. Mr. Heckman, may you please publish Exhibit 3 for the jury? Now, can you see this okay, Mr. Ayers?
Yes, I can.
How much does this contract say Ernest was to be paid?
It says he's going to be paid $500,000, and that was huge to us at the time. Ernest had never made more than $40,000 from an acting gig.
Just looking at this contract, what stands out to you?
Well, there's two things that stood out to me when he signed the contract. It was that the studio said that it would not expose the performer to any unreasonable risk of harm, and it said it would provide a safe environment of filming during the production of the film.
Thank you, Mr. Heckman. Let's talk a little bit about Ernest's time filming Cobain. Where was Cobain filmed?
In Los Angeles, California.
When did Ernest move to Los Angeles?
He moved in May of 2019.
And in May of 2019, how was your relationship with Ernest?
Oh, it was great. I mean, I was still in New York, so the time difference made it a little hard, but we made time to talk to each other every day, and he would always describe to me how his days went, how he was feeling. We always made time for each other.
And did he express to you how he was feeling on his first day of shooting, which was June 3rd?
Yeah, I remember June 3rd, he was devastated after that day of filming. He was forced to refilm the same scene 62 times, and Avery wasn't happy with him at all.
And after that first day of filming, did he describe to you how he was feeling on other days?
Yeah, the next time I remember was on June 5th, and started to notice that he was looking sick.
Now, what happened to Ernest on June 5th?
Well, on June 5th, I noticed he started to look pretty bad, and we were talking like we normally did, and he was opening the door to his trailer as he was getting to set, and he just abruptly stopped talking mid-sentence. He just kind of trailed off.
Did there come a time while you were talking that he described what he was seeing?
Yeah.
And was he describing what he was seeing as he was seeing it?
Yes.
Tell us exactly what he described that he was looking at.
Well, as he walked into his trailer, he said he saw a syringe on the table, and it was on top of a note, and the syringe was full of heroin, and then he just hung up abruptly.
When was the next time that you talked to Ernest?
The very next day, on June 6th.
Did you notice anything about Ernest on June 6th?
Yeah, June 6th, he was shaking, and he sounded awful, and he was having mood swings, and he just looked high and strung out and was slurring his words. He was just in really bad shape that day.
Now, you and Ernest had been together for quite some time at that point. Had you ever seen him like this before?
Yeah, I saw him like that in 2016 when he was addicted.
And did he ever tell you why he might have looked like this?
Yeah, he told me on June 19th.
And what did he describe to you on that day?
On that day, he he called me and he was upset and he was crying and just agitated. And he told me he was using heroin again, but it was obvious. I could tell. And he said that that Avery had told him that he would find someone else.
Objection, Your Honor. This goes to our motion to exclude in pretrial.
Your Honor, may we approach outside the presence of the jury?
Yes.
Okay, I will move the jury into the breakout room and let you know when they are there. Okay, the jury is outside this room.
Yes, Your Honor. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, pursuant to your pretrial order, the defense asked to exclude the specific language that Avery Hitchcock made me. We've simply instructed our witness to utilize the testimony that Avery Hitchcock would find someone else who would. This witness did not use the phrase or expression that Avery Hitchcock made me, just that he would find someone else who could.
Okay, Ms. Hughes?
Yes, Your Honor. It was our understanding that the only admissible piece of testimony from that phone conversation was the admissions that he was addicted again and using again, but everything concerning Mr. Hitchcock contributing to that use was excluded.
Okay, so I don't know if the specific statement about getting somebody else to replace him, I don't know if that was addressed in the pretrial hearing, but that would also be hearsay, would it not, Ms. Gordon?
Yes, Your Honor, and that falls under a hearsay exception, which is an opposing party statement. That statement would be a statement from Mr. Avery Hitchcock.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, Ms. Hughes.
You know, I would argue that there's a double layer of hearsay we're dealing with then, and that only is an exception to one layer of that hearsay.
Ms. Gordon, I wish to respond to that.
Yes, that would also fall under an excited utterance 803.2. This statement was elicited under the stress of Mr. Jackie Ayers speaking to Mr. Ernest Ayers and demanding why he had changed and what condition he was in, telling him that I know you're addicted again. So these statements were in response to Mrs. Jackie Ayers, or Mr. Jackie Ayers, I apologize, statements.
Okay. Well, it's not an excited utterance. So again, just because he's having an emotional conversation, then it's not, it doesn't, I don't think, right, create an excited utterance statement. There are multiple levels of hearsay. So that anything that Mr. Ayers' testimony of what Ernest said that Avery said is excluded as hearsay. Anything else? No.
Nothing
Okay.
further from defense, Your Honor.
All right.
Your Honor, should I bring the jury back?
Yes.
I'll let you know when they're here. Okay, Your Honor, the jury is back.
All right, Ms. Gordon, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Ayers, when you got confirmation that Ernest was using heroin again, what did you do?
Well, I hopped on the first flight I could and I went to see him.
Now, I understand that the testimony we're about to get into may be difficult, but can you tell us what happened when you arrived at Ernest's apartment?
Yeah, I got to Ernest's apartment at around 10 a.m. And when I walked in, he was unconscious, laying on the couch.
And when you walked in, did you notice anything in that apartment?
Yeah, I saw him and around his apartment. I saw a note, the same note that was in his trailer. It said the same thing.
Calling court and counsel attention to what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 8 for identification. Mr. Heckman, may you please publish Exhibit 8 for the jury? Mr. Ayers, could you please read what was written on this note?
Yeah, it says to find Kurt, you have to let Ernest go. Call 555-651-1892 and he'll help you find him.
Thank you, Mr. Heckman. Mr. Ayers, were you made aware of Ernest's cause of death?
Yeah, I was.
Your Honor, at this time, we would like to introduce what has been pre-admitted as Exhibit 12, and we ask to publish it at this time. Mr. Heckman, may you please publish Exhibit 12 for the jury? Now, Mr. Ayers, how did you find out about Ernest's cause of death?
Oh, this autopsy report.
Did you read that report?
Yeah.
And how did it say that he died?
From a cardiac arrest from a heroin overdose.
Moment to confer, Your Honor.
Yes.
No further questions.
All right, Ms. Hughes?
May I proceed, Your Honor? Mr. Ayers, I first want to start out by saying that I can't imagine how difficult today might be for you. So if you need a break at all, please just let me know and we can speak to the judge about that, okay?
Thank you.
I first have some questions regarding Mr. Ayers' career. You said he graduated from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts.
Yeah, that's right.
And then began his career as an actor.
Yes.
He took some time off in 2016.
Yeah.
He was under some stress.
Yeah, he was.
So he turned to heroin.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was a tough year for us.
Understandable. Unfortunately, he became addicted to heroin during that period.
Yeah.
And he promised you that he would stop using.
Yeah, he went to rehab and he wasn't using.
But before he went to rehab, he tried to stop on his own.
Yeah.
And he couldn't.
Yeah.
Not until he checked into rehab for 2 months.
Yeah, and then he was clean for 3 years.
And like you said, when he checked out, he was clean and he became committed to that sobriety.
Yeah, he was.
He started attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings.
Yes.
He got a sponsor in New York.
Yes.
And relied upon you, of course, in his journey to sobriety.
Yeah, I was right there with him.
Because those support systems for an addict are important in that continued fight for sobriety.
Yeah.
Mr. Ayers, you would never want Mr. Ayers to be in a situation where he might be tempted to use again.
Yeah.
I have some questions about that lunch you went on with Mr. Hitchcock. You just testified that everyone knows who Mr. Hitchcock is.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the biggest Hollywood directors.
And it's your testimony today that Mr. Ayers informed Mr. Hitchcock about his addiction.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Ayers actually asked for your permission before signing the contract at that lunch.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't need to, but he did. We were married at the time, so
And you responded, yes, of course.
yeah, it was going to be the biggest role of his life.
And you also testified that your attorney wasn't at that lunch.
No,
Mr. Ayers' agent wasn't at that lunch.
no,
But even with these three concerns, Mr. Ayers still went ahead and signed that contract.
yeah, he did.
You didn't take some time to think about it later that day.
No, I wish we would have.
You didn't ask Mr. Hitchcock if your agent could review it,
No,
even though you were nervous about the role.
yeah, I was nervous that Avery Hitchcock wanted to method act.
You were nervous that Mr. Ayers was going to be playing a character with the exact same addiction as your husband.
That's right.
I'd like to talk about filming. You said filming took place in LA.
Yes.
And at first, Mr. Ayers was excited.
Yeah.
He'd spent a long time prepping and he was ready to get going.
Yeah.
But that first day of filming didn't go well for him.
Right. Avery made him reshoot a scene 62 times.
He fell flat in his performance.
That's what he told me.
After spending a year getting ready, his performance didn't live up to what he expected it to be.
No, it didn't.
And you would agree, Mr. Ayers, that someone in their breakout performance would understandably be feeling pressure in that moment.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he was.
And with that pressure comes stress.
Yeah.
So Mr. Ayers was feeling stress in this moment, just like he was in 2016.
Yeah.
The stress in 2016 that led him to use heroin for the first time.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Ayers, I'd like to talk a little bit about the testimony you gave regarding Mr. Ayers finding a syringe in his trailer. Now, you testified that the syringe, Mr. Ayers told you the syringe was full of heroin.
Yeah, he did.
But in reality, he actually could only tell you that he thought it looked like heroin.
He told me he used it.
But in this phone call, he didn't tell you he used it.
No, not in that phone call. He hung up on me.
He just said it looked like it might be heroin.
Yeah.
And then he hung up on you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you tried to reach him that same day,
Yep.
but couldn't get him back until that next day.
Yeah, that's right.
And after you got a hold of him again, your phone conversations became different.
Yeah,
They were shorter,
they were.
less frequent.
Yes.
And you began to suspect that your husband was using heroin again.
Yeah. See the signs.
And over a course of days and weeks, you confronted him about it,
Yeah.
but he denied it
Yeah, he did.
because he was hiding something from you.
Yeah.
He told you that he was just in character.
Yeah, that's what he said, but I could tell.
You could tell, and even so, you didn't get a direct answer until the 19th.
That's right.
And on the day of the 19th, he told you, he came clean and said he was addicted again.
Yeah.
And this time, he was away from those NA meetings in New York.
Yeah, he was performing on the Cobain set.
He was away from his sponsor in New York.
Yeah.
He was away from you.
Yeah.
He was away from the important support system that he had built in New York,
That's right.
and he relapsed.
Yeah, he did.
No further questions.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Ayers, Ms. Hughes asked you a lot of questions about why and how you and Mr. Ernest Ayers made the decision for him to do Cobain. Why did Ernest decide to take on this role after he learned about the method acting?
I mean, this was going to be the biggest role of his career. So obviously, as a young up and coming actor, this was an opportunity that he couldn't pass up.
And did he have some assurances regarding the method acting?
Yeah, he was confident that he wouldn't have to do method acting.
Now, Ms. Hughes also asked you about, or she stated that Ernest was experiencing some pressure. Where was this pressure coming from?
From Avery Hitchcock.
No further questions, Your Honor.
I forget, Mr. Bailiff, are we doing recross or no?
Your Honor, recross is permitted if they can make an offer of proof to impeach the witness. Otherwise, generally, no.
Okay, Ms. Hughes?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls to stand Mr. Chandler Matz.
Okay.
Your Honor, may I inquire?
Yes.
Hey, Chandler, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Chandler Matz.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm an actor.
Well, Chandler, as an actor, what are some of the more well-known projects you've been in?
On the big screen, I've been in The Departed, Ocean's 13, and I've done some TV stuff, NCIS, Law and Order.
Okay, now I want to talk about why you're here today. Did you have a role in this Kurt Cobain film?
Yes, I did. I played Danny Goldberg, who is Nirvana's manager.
Chandler, have you done work with Mr. Avery Hitchcock in the past?
I have. I've worked with Avery twice before Cobain.
Have you ever method acted with him?
Yes.
Can you tell us what method acting is?
It's an acting technique where the performer aims for total emotional identification with the character.
Chandler, how does the director, Mr. Avery Hitchcock, explain method acting to his actors?
He says you need to lose yourself in the role. You need to be that person, live as they live.
And does Hitchcock require actors to employ this method acting?
I wouldn't say require, no, but there's definitely a lot of pressure on these actors due to his status and stature in Hollywood.
Well, what about his status and stature would put a lot of pressure to method act?
Well, one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, he can make or break an actor's career. It's huge.
Now, has Mr. Hitchcock ever pressured you to method act?
Yes.
What was that?
He did on one of the movies that I was with that I spoke about earlier. He pressured me to smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke in real life, but my character in that film did smoke. So I started smoking cigarettes during the filming.
Chandler, in your experience with Avery Hitchcock in the past, can you give us an example where method acting has gone too far in a Hitchcock set?
Sure. On set, one of the films, he had a very small actress lose weight. He wasn't happy until she was gone in an unhealthy way. One day she collapsed from dehydration. And then another time he had an actor jump out of a moving car 80 feet into the water.
And just to clarify, Chandler, were you present for both of those scenarios?
Yes, I was in both those movies, sir.
Now, Chandler, are you still working with Mr. Hitchcock today?
No, I stopped once I saw what happened on the set of Cobain. It went too far.
Now, I want to talk about the Cobain set and specifically Ernest Ayers a little bit. Can you tell us what you knew about Ernest's experience before the Cobain set?
Yeah, I knew he didn't have much experience. He was just a young new actor trying to make it in Hollywood.
Well, Chandler, how could a young new actor get a primetime role in an Avery Hitchcock film?
Well, Hitchcock is kind of known for almost always casting unknowns as his leads.
Has he ever told you why?
Yeah, he told me once that it's because when they're young and unknown, they have to listen to you.
Okay, now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the filming of the movie. How often would you see Ernest on set of Cobain?
Every single time I was on set, he was in all my scenes.
Were you there on the first day of filming?
Yes, I was. Everybody was there.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that first day went?
Yeah, it didn't go well in the morning for scene one. I mean, it was basically a disaster.
Well, explain to me why it was such a disaster.
Well, the first scene's fairly straightforward. It was just Ernest in the camera. He's doing an interview as Kurt Cobain. So no stunts, no moving props, just Ernest in the camera. But Hitchcock was just really unhappy with his performance.
What did Avery Hitchcock say about Ernest's performance on this first day?
Nothing specific, like he gave no guidance, but he just said, "This is not Kurt Cobain. Do it again."
Do it again. How many times did Ernest do this scene? Mr. Matz, could you hear me there?
Yeah, could you repeat that?
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned, you said do it again. How many times did Avery Hitchcock have Ernest do this first scene?
62 takes.
What happened after all those takes?
Well, Hitchcock called it quits and said that we'll shoot it again next week sometime. And hopefully we'll have Kurt Cobain by then.
Hopefully we'll have Kirk. So what did Hitchcock say to Ernest after he called it quits, if anything?
He said, "We tried it your way. Now we try it my way."
Now, Chandler, was this first scene, was it ever shot again?
Yes, it was.
When was that?
A couple of days later on June 5th that week.
Can you tell us how Ernest's performance was on the 5th?
The kid crushed it. I mean, it only took one take. The whole crew cheered. I was happy for him.
How did Ernest react to this?
Obviously, he was happy with everybody, giving him praise and accomplishing that, but something was just off.
Well, something was off. What do you mean something was off?
Well, off camera that day, he looked as messed up as Cobain did when he was filming that scene one, for the refilm we just talked about.
You said he looked messed up. Can you give me a little description of what you mean he looked messed up?
Yeah, he had this flushed face. He definitely had low energy the whole day, and he had these eyes that were like they were vacant eyes.
Now, are you familiar with somebody and how they look when they're on drugs?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, working in Hollywood, you see things in the acting industry, and drugs is one of those things it's pretty common. So cocaine and heroin are really the two that are a lot of actors' choices.
And are you familiar with the symptoms that you see when somebody uses drugs?
Yeah.
Ms. Gordon, could you please publish what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 13? Now, given your background and looking at this UCLA document, did it appear to you that Ernest was using drugs?
Yes. He's got the symptoms in there. He had that.
What symptoms did he have?
He had the flushed face. See the flushed skin on there. It looked like he had stomach pain. He was grabbing it. Nausea. He had he had the weight loss.
Was this the only time Ernest looked like this?
No, it was really the rest of filming. He looked like this.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon. Now, Ernest, excuse me, Chandler, what did you do once you found out that Ernest was using these drugs?
Well, as soon as I thought he was using, I went up to Avery and, expressed my concern that I thought Ernest was using heroin again, or heroin.
Was Hitchcock startled?
No,
Was he concerned?
not in the slightest.
What did Mr. Hitchcock say, if anything?
He said, well, Kurt Cobain did heroin.
Chandler, after this conversation with Mr. Hitchcock, did Ernest's appearance improve after?
No, I mean, it looked the same or worse. At times, he looked like he was just high or even having withdrawals.
When was the last time you saw Ernest?
I saw him on June 20th, the day before he died.
How did he look then?
He looked pretty strung out.
And if I showed you a picture of how he looked after he received this note, would you recognize it?
Sure.
Your Honor, permission to publish a still shot of Exhibit 10 that's been discussed during pretrial matters.
Yes.
Ms. Gordon.
Is there an objection? I don't know that Exhibit 10 was discussed.
I'm sorry, we have no objection.
Go ahead.
Ms. Gordon, could you please pull up that still shot? Now, Chandler, what are we looking at here?
A picture of Ernest that was during filming.
Can you describe what exactly Mr. Ayers is exhibiting here?
Yeah, you can see his eyes are sunk back. That's what I meant by the vacant eyes and that flush skin around his cheeks. And I mean, the low energy I spoke about, I mean, this is just how he looked all the time through the rest of filming.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon. Now, Chandler, what was Mr. Hitchcock saying to Ernest on June 20th, the day before he died?
Yeah, he said just a little longer. You are Kurt.
Moment to confer, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Matz, you said you were in 2 previous films with Mr. Hitchcock, correct?
Yes,
And you knew that he employed or encouraged method acting,
yes, I did.
but you use a different method to prepare for your roles, right?
A different technique of acting. Yes, sir. That's correct.
More of your
My chair is
imagination.
broken.
Oh, I apologize. More of your imagination, sir.
Can you say that again? I didn't.
Sorry, more of your imagination to prepare for your roles, correct?
Yeah, that'd be accurate.
But Mr. Hitchcock still hires you for his movies, right?
Yeah.
Now, on direct, some prior instances of method acting were brought up. One dealing with you, where you were encouraged to smoke for a role, right?
Yes.
But ultimately, in the end, and you even referenced on direct that you weren't required to, right?
Technically, I wasn't required to, but you do feel that pressure from Avery. But that would be accurate.
So it would be fair to say, ultimately, in the end, it's the actor's choice to method act, right?
It is the actor's choice, but as I said, sometimes those pressures just make you make that decision too.
So in the end, the actor who lost weight had a choice to diet, right?
Yeah, technically, you're right.
And the actor that did his own stunts had a choice to do his own stunts, correct?
Yeah, he made that decision.
Now, you've never seen Mr. Hitchcock ask an actor to do something illegal, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you've never seen Mr. Hitchcock ask an actor to do illegal drugs.
No, I haven't seen that.
And Mr. Hitchcock has never asked you to do something you were uncomfortable doing on set, right?
No, he hasn't.
Okay, well, let's move on to talk about your time on set with Ernest. You referenced on direct, you played Danny Goldberg, Nirvana's manager, right?
That's right.
And you were only in about half the scenes that Ernest was in, though, correct?
Yeah, I think about 7 scenes out of those days of filming. Yeah.
And the only time you met Ernest before shooting and offset was that cast and crew kickoff party,
Yeah, the one on June 1st.
June 1st, yes. And this was before Ernest started shooting and acting as a heroin addict on screen, right?
Yeah, it was before the start of any filming. Yeah.
Let's move on to some of these events in LA. You referenced that you knew Mr. Ayers had very little experience in the industry, right?
Yeah.
He had moved from New York to LA for this role,
Yeah, he did.
and he got the lead role in this movie.
Yes, that's correct.
You would agree with me, lead roles like this in a major movie, they come with a lot of pressure.
Definitely. Absolutely.
And in your experience, you've seen actors in the industry turn to drugs such as cocaine and heroin, right?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately.
And you thought Ernest was turning to drugs, specifically heroin, right?
Yeah.
And just in the few weeks that you knew him, you saw him mainly acting as a heroin addict on screen, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there were some scenes I think that weren't a part of that time, but yeah, he definitely did some of that.
So it's fair to say you didn't really know Ernest Ayers, correct?
And I only knew what I saw at that kickoff party, and then, you know, seven full days was set.
And at the time, you didn't know about Mr. Ayers' previous addiction to heroin from 2016, correct?
I wasn't aware of that.
You didn't know how that disease affected his life on and off set.
No.
Regardless of what you didn't know, sir, you wanted to help him, right?
Yeah, that's why I went up to Avery that day and, you know, expressed my concern.
Well, Mr. Matz, you claim you went to Avery, but you didn't tell anyone else, correct?
I mean, I went to the director that I knew. I thought that was the right place to go.
I'm sorry, sir. Was that a yes to my question?
Yes, it was, but that's who I went to.
You also didn't call 911 or anything like that?
No, I didn't call 911.
But you did go to Mr. Ayers himself, right?
Yeah, I did go to him.
And you told him you don't need to do this to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, he just looked terrible. Yeah.
You thought he needed to make a choice to stop using heroin.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. I just wanted him to know he doesn't have to do this.
So in the end, you would agree he did have a choice.
Yeah, but he just said to me he had to do it.
Was that a yes to my question, sir?
I said yes, but he said to me he had to do it.
You didn't see Mr. Hitchcock threaten to fire Mr. Ayers, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you didn't see Mr. Hitchcock give Mr. Ayers any heroin, right?
No, I did not see that, sir.
I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Chandler, I'm just going to brush up a little bit on what Mr. Rawlinson asked you on cross-examination. And we talked a lot about your method acting experience. So tell us why you smoked cigs on a Hitchcock film to method act.
I did it because I felt the pressure of Avery. I mean, he suggested it. I mean, when I smoked, I made sure he saw me.
And you were asked why you approached Avery Hitchcock and not anybody else. Why did you go to Avery Hitchcock with concerns about Ernest?
You know, I'd been in 2 movies with him. I felt like I knew him enough to do that. And, you know, a director in their lead, that's a strong relationship. So I thought he was the best person to go to.
Moment to confer, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any other witnesses?
No, Your Honor, at this time, may this witness be excused, first of
Yes.
all.
Thank
At
you.
this time, the plaintiff rests her case.
Okay. All right. Or should we take our break now or outside the presence of the jury? Or are we going to take a moment outside the presence of the jury? Or are we going to take a break now?
It's whichever the advocates would like.
Brief break is fine with us, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then we will resume. It is now 3:38. So we'll resume at 3:43.
Mr. Baylor, can we please get a time check when you get a chance?
Yes, I'll put those in the chat for you.
Thank you.
Before we begin defense case in chief, I'd ask all evaluators and jurors to either turn your camera on or send me a direct message so I can confirm that you are back. Evaluators, you can turn your cameras off. Let me double check the jurors quick. Okay, Your Honor, the evaluators and jurors are back. We can proceed when you're ready.
Okay, great. Okay, defense.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Mr. Avery Hitchcock. Good afternoon. Would you mind telling the jury your name?
Yes, ma'am. My name is is Avery Hitchcock.
And Mr. Hitchcock, what do you do for a living?
I'm a filmmaker, ma'am. I also write, produce, direct, and I'm the CEO for Hitchcock Studios.
And how long have you been in the industry?
A little over 30 years now.
About how many films have you been a part of?
I have about 30 credits associated with my name.
Have those films won any awards?
Yes, yes, they have. They've been nominated for a number of awards, and they've won some of those.
Now, when a film wins an award, is it just you who wins an award or actors?
I've personally won a couple, but my actors have gone on to win many, and the movies themselves have gone on to win some awards as well.
How's that make you feel as a director?
Well, just to get nominated for award is a pretty big honor because of all the work that the actors, the staff, and the crew that they put into it. Just to get that acknowledgement, from some outside party that we're doing well is an honor.
Mr. Hitchcock, the jury has heard quite a bit today about method acting. If you wouldn't mind, could you just explain to the jury in your own words what method acting is to you?
Yes, ma'am. So method acting is an acting technique that, throughout my career, I found to be particularly successful in putting forth a good performance. And what it requires is, in order for actors to express themselves as their characters, they identify with those characters, oftentimes, experiencing what their characters experienced.
Can method acting ever go too far?
There are examples of method acting going too far, but not on my movies.
How do you make sure it never goes too far on your movies?
Well, it's just a matter of clearly, establishing lines. Safety is a priority on Hitchcock Studios, in all Hitchcock Studios movies. So we make that known to our actors.
Ultimately, who has the choice on your sets to method act?
Oh, the actors. I would never make an actor do something they didn't otherwise want to do.
Mr. Hitchcock, I have some questions now about the events regarding why we're here today. First, who is Mr. Ernest Ayers to you?
Mr. Ayers was a remarkably talented young actor who I ultimately chose to star in my movie Cobain.
Had you met him before casting him in Cobain?
I hadn't met him, no. A friend of mine, Miss Carrie Bricker, told me about him. And I got an opportunity to observe him in one of his off-Broadway performances in New York. And he was amazing. I mean, he could act, he could sing, he had the right look. When I went out and saw him, I knew he was the right guy for the role.
Now, what kind of resume did Mr. Ayers have before you cast him in Cobain?
He was, pretty inexperienced. I believe he had, a few off-Broadway performances. I want to say a very minor role in a movie and some commercial jobs. But I kind of saw that inexperience as a benefit.
Why did you see inexperience as a benefit?
I think it goes to the impact, that actors have on the audience. When they see an unknown face, it allows them to kind of suspend disbelief. Whereas if they see, the lead role being this major A-lister, they don't really see the character, they see the actor.
Would you say you have any type of power over these lesser known actors?
I don't know if, power is the right word. Everyone has a role to play, in filming a movie. The actors have to act, the light technicians have to make sure the lighting's run, the cameramen have to make sure filming goes on, and the director is the person kind of making sure all these different pieces work together to push forward the production.
Mr. Hitchcock, I now have some questions about the lunch you went on with the Ayers. What was discussed at that lunch?
Well, I offered Mr. Ayers the role, and he was very excited about it. Miss Ayers was too, and he decided ultimately to take the role. I want to say we probably discussed method acting as well, because that's something I normally discuss with my actors.
Was Mr. Ayers' addiction to heroin discussed?
No, ma'am, it was not.
Now, Mr. Hitchcock, how would an actor use method acting to play a heroin addict without using heroin?
Well, Ernest Ayers was going to play Kurt Cobain, in my movie, and to completely characterize Kurt Cobain as a heroin addict, I think, isn't right. Kurt Cobain was so much more. I mean, he was a father, a songwriter, a musician, a husband. So there are many aspects of Kurt Cobain that an actor could identify with.
I'd like to now talk about the filming of Cobain. Where did filming take place?
Out in Hitchcock Studios lot in LA, California.
And when did filming take place?
In June of 2019.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about that first day of filming?
Yes, ma'am. So on that first day, we were filming the opening scene, and the opening scene was in 1994, further along in Kurt Cobain's career, where it was, noticeably he was experiencing kind of depression and, heroin use, you could tell. So that was the first scene we decided to film. Ernest went out there and it was his first day. I believe he was a little nervous. So we did a number of takes to try to get it right. And ultimately we couldn't get it right on that day.
How many shots did you end up filming of that scene?
I want to say it was around 60 or so.
Would you say you were being hard on Mr. Ayers?
I mean, no, it was an important scene, no harder than I normally be. We had to make sure he could capture the true voice of Kurt Cobain, and he just wasn't able to get there on that first day.
Mr. Hitchcock, were you here when plaintiff's counsel made opening statements?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And then again during Mr. Ayers' testimony?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
So did you hear plaintiff's counsel story regarding a syringe and a note being left in Mr. Ayers' trailer?
I did hear that, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hitchcock, did you leave a syringe in a trailer?
I did not leave any syringe or the note. I did end up giving Mr. Ayers a note after.
Your Honor, facts not in evidence. Opening statements, as we're well aware, are not considered evidence.
Ms. Hughes?
Your Honor, may we have a sidebar?
Yes.
I'll let you know when the jury has been sequestered. Okay, Your Honor, the jury is now sequestered.
All right, Mr. Heckman, what's the objection?
Your Honor, I believe Ms. Hughes' question began with a question dealing with opening statements and was going to ask the witness specifically questions pertaining to Ms. Gordon's opening statement. However, opening statements are not evidence, so I just ask that we bar Ms. Hughes from asking questions pertaining to stuff that is not in evidence.
Ms. Hughes?
Your Honor, if I could get specifically what it is that's not in evidence, and I can point to where it is in the record, if that's what counsel. I believe I need a little bit more clarification on what is the objection pertaining to.
Mr. Heckman?
Yeah,
What is objectionable? I understand the beginning part of the question. You heard the opening statement and things of that nature, but what evidence do you think Ms. Hughes or Mr. Hitchcock is going to testify to that you find objectionable?
Yes, Your Honor, specifically the testimony that Avery Hitchcock put the syringe within the trailer of Ernest Ayers.
Mhm. Well, that's already been excluded. The fact that it was excluded as hearsay, but Mr. Hitchcock can testify that he did not, or it did, or it was denied. It was previously denied as speculation. Mr.
Right.
Hitchcock can testify that he didn't leave the syringe there. That's based on his personal knowledge or experience, or what he actually did or did not do. So is there something else that was objectionable regarding his testimony, or what Mr. Hitchcock was going to testify to?
Your Honor, just the basis of the objection was that we don't ask questions about opening statement remarks. All I know is Ms. Hughes prefaced the question with something that happened in opening statements. I understand Mr. Hitchcock can answer questions as to what he heard during the plaintiff's case in chief, however, just not during the opening statements, if that makes sense.
Okay.
May I-
Yeah, Ms. Hughes, go ahead.
Your Honor, I would just then argue that at that point I had moved on from those rounds of questioning, so therefore I think the objection was untimely.
Okay. So, and I'll just point out in real life, the witnesses wouldn't be present during opening statements. So you wouldn't ask them about something you heard in opening statement in any event, but in any event. Okay, so again, we can go forward with the testimony of the witness as to what he saw, heard, did, or did not do, but we'll go from there, okay?
Would Your Honor like me to bring the jury back?
Yes.
Okay, one moment, please. Okay, Your Honor, the jury is back in the courtroom.
All right, Ms. Hughes.
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Hitchcock. You just continue. You were speaking about a note you gave Mr. Ernest Ayers.
Yes, ma'am. So I didn't leave a note in any trailer, but after we cut filming on that first day of shooting, I did go to Mr. Ayers' trailer and give him a note. Yes.
What was the context of that note?
Well, you know, that first day of filming, I think we had started Ernest off. It was his first day, so I kind of maybe started him off on a scene that far along in Kurt Cobain's career. You know, wasn't the best decision, and I could tell he was stressed out and kind of nervous. So I went back to his trailer to kind of, I guess, lift him up.
And did he ask you anything in that conversation?
Yeah, so I went in there and he told me, you know, he was kind of stressed that he wanted it to be perfect, that he had been prepping for some time, you know, which is understandable. You know, it was his first day, so I understand he was nervous and stressed. And he asked me, he said, some marijuana might help. And I ended up giving him the number to the guy I used for marijuana, with marijuana being legal in California.
Who is the guy you use for marijuana?
His name is Barry, ma'am.
To your knowledge, does Barry deal anything other than marijuana?
No, I've been going to him since 2016, only for marijuana.
After you gave Mr. Ayers the number of a weed dealer, did you notice a change on set?
Yeah, after we had that conversation, I noticed he was a lot more in character. So on the 5th, we were supposed to film a completely different scene, and Mr. Ayers walked in. He said, "Hey, boss, I want to shoot that scene again." And he came in and he gave a tremendous performance.
Was Mr. Ayers a good actor, in your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was remarkably talented. I wouldn't have hired him if he wasn't.
Mr. Hitchcock, were you approached by anyone with concerns about Mr. Ayers' behavior?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Would you know why Mr. Matz would testify today that he approached you?
No, I do not, ma'am.
Mr. Hitchcock, what's the status of Cobain today?
We ended up not going forward with filming.
Why is that?
Well, after what happened with Mr. Ayers, it was just kind of too tragic to move on with that project, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Hitchcock, I'm going to show you a document that's been pre-admitted by the parties. Your Honor, permission to show the jury. Now, Mr. Hitchcock, this is what's been marked as for identification as Exhibit 13. I'll represent to you that it's an article from UCLA about the use of heroin. I'm just going to zoom in on a couple portions of that article. If you wouldn't mind reading to the jury that first paragraph marked how is heroin used?
Yes, ma'am. It says heroin can be snorted or smoked. The most common and most dangerous method of use is intravenous injection.
Mr. Hitchcock, now if you'd read in that second paragraph, the last sentence starting with the word relapse.
Yes, ma'am. It says relapse is frequent, especially when someone is stressed, depressed, or experiencing trouble at home or at work.
Now, Mr. Hitchcock, I'm going to show you what's also been pre-admitted as Exhibit 12. Your Honor, permission to show. Mr. Hitchcock, I'll represent to you that this is the autopsy of Mr. Ernest Ayers. Again, I'm just going to focus on two sections if you wouldn't mind reading some relevant material to the jury. If you could just read the cause of death there.
Yes, it says cardiac arrest from heroin overdose.
And then in the external examination paragraph, if you would read the last two sentences beginning with the word body.
Yes, it says body shows 9 wounds, 6 in the upper left thigh and 3 in the left medial humerus, consistent with intravenous injections at various stages of healing. Wounds range from appearing fresh to potentially up to 5 days of age.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchcock. Now, for my last few questions, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. It's important that you take time to think about it, as these questions will have an important effect on the jury's determination today.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel testifying.
The objection is sustained. The jury will disregard the last statement by counsel.
Mr. Hitchcock, did you ask Ernest Ayers to use heroin?
No, I did not, ma'am.
Did you ever ask anyone else to provide Mr. Ayers with heroin?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see Ernest Ayers using heroin?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading.
Overruled.
I'll repeat the question, Mr. Hitchcock. Did you ever see Ernest Ayers using heroin?
No, I did not, ma'am.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Hitchcock, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions that you just spoke about on direct examination with Ms. Hughes. Now, you stated in the beginning you've had several successful films in the past, right?
Yes, sir.
And with that, you have a little bit of clout in Hollywood?
Clout, sir, sorry.
Well, you've been voted the most influential person in Hollywood, right?
I was on a list of influential people, yes, sir.
And you've been on that list for 16 years in a row.
That's correct.
Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about Ernest. Now, at the time you hired Ernest, you knew he was inexperienced.
That's correct, sir.
You knew he only had one other role in film.
Yes, sir.
And in that role, he was playing barista number 2.
Yes, sir.
He didn't have a speaking role in this film.
I'm not sure if barista number 2 was a speaking role or not. Yes, yes. Probably a minor role, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't have a speaking role, but regardless, Mr. Hitchcock, you prefer inexperienced actors, right?
For my lead roles, yes, because of the impact that it has on the audience.
And you mentioned on direct, it's because the audience, they don't recognize them, but you also prefer them because they're easier to work with, right?
Yes, in some ways.
They're easier to mold.
Yes, I enjoy kind of that coaching, teacher, and mentoring aspect of being a director.
Well, you like coaching them, but in some ways you'd say they're also easier to control.
In some ways, they could be, but that's not why I hire them.
Okay, now I want to talk about what you had Ernest do. Now, you said you like method acting, right?
Yes, sir.
You fiercely believe in this technique of method acting.
Yes, sir. I'm a big fan.
Method acting, that's when you fully identify with your character. You put it in some fashion like that, right?
Yes, you express yourself as a character by identifying with them.
You identify with your character,
Yes, sir.
often by doing what that character does.
Oftentimes, yes.
Okay, now I want to transition and talk about the actual filming. That was me filming. The filming of Kurt Cobain.
Yes, sir.
The first scene, it wasn't easy for Ernest, right?
No, it was difficult.
And the whole set, everyone was there to watch on that first day.
Yes, it was the opening scene. It was an important scene.
Ernest, he performed kind of poor, right?
Yeah, I mean, flat. He wasn't quite capturing what we needed him to capture.
And he didn't sharpen up at all after 62 takes, right?
No,
So after this, you approach Ernest
I did.
and you give him the number of a drug dealer.
Yes, after he was looking for some marijuana, I gave him.
Right.
That, yes,
And I think you said on direct examination, this was Barry's number.
correct, sir.
Ms. Gordon, could you please publish Exhibit 8, what's already been pre-admitted as Exhibit 8? Now, you claim this number here, it's to get weed for Ernest.
That's correct. It was for Ernest to be able to get marijuana.
But you know well that marijuana is legalized in California, don't you?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
You can get it at a dispensary.
Yes, you can get kind of the generic stuff at a dispensary. That's true, sir.
And he wouldn't need a prescription to get it from a dispensary.
No. Or he would perhaps. I mean, he wanted good marijuana.
And that middle number, it says call 555-651-1892. He'll help you find him. Right?
Yeah, it does.
But Kurt Cobain, he wasn't known as a pothead, right?
No, I don't believe so.
He was known as a heroin addict.
Again, I wouldn't exclusively characterize Kurt Cobain as a heroin addict, but that was something he was known for.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Gordon. Could you please take that down? Now, this Barry guy, you messaged him, right?
Yes, a couple days later, I believe.
Barry's number was on that napkin.
Oh, that's correct, sir.
Your Honor, permission to publish the members of the jury was admitted as Exhibit 14. Ms. Gordon, could you please pull that up for us? Now, this is a message between you and Barry, right?
That's correct, sir.
And you said at the top right here, you will take care of him. I will cover the cost, the money sign, right?
That's correct, sir.
Now, you said you would pay for something to your drug dealer, Barry.
I would pay for what I normally get from him, which is marijuana.
Your Honor, we ask the court's permission to read in stipulation 17 found on page 9 of the case file.
Go ahead.
Members of the jury, Your Honor, would you like me to instruct what a stipulation is, or would Your Honor like to?
No, go ahead.
Your Honor, or members of the jury, a stipulation is simply when both parties agree on a fact. Stipulation 17. The cell phone associated with the number 555-651-1892 was a prepaid wireless phone, also known as a burner phone. Efforts by the parties and the Los Angeles Police Department to find or identify the owner of this phone were unsuccessful. The phone has not been used since Ernest Ayer's death was publicly reported on June 21st of 2019. Now, Mr. Hitchcock, I'm going to move on from Barry for a moment. Now, after you gave him this note, he began to act different, right?
Yeah, he came in on that morning of the 5th and asked me to do that scene. He did really well. That's correct, sir.
And after you gave him this note, he really started to immerse himself in his role.
Yes, he started to act better as Kurt Cobain.
And on direct examination, you looked at this medical journal, right?
Which medical journal? Sorry, sir.
The UCLA Medical Journal
Oh,
Exhibit
yes,
13.
okay. Yes, sir.
Gordon, could you please publish for the members of the jury Exhibit 13? I hope. Ms. Gordon, are we having some technical difficulties? If so, I can move on.
Counsel, I can share for you if you, oh,
Thank you so much. Well, kind of need the full thing.
I think that's not our screen, sorry.
Let's drop it. I'll move on. Now, you mentioned after this note, he really started to be in his character as Kurt Cobain, right?
Yes.
And after this note that you gave him, it didn't seem that he was wearing any makeup on set.
On one occasion, that's correct.
And without makeup, he had a flush face.
There was one occasion where it didn't seem like he was wearing makeup.
Right. You saw him with a flush face, right?
That's correct.
And you read the entirety of Exhibit 13?
Yes, sir.
And you know that a flush face is a symptom of a heroin user.
Yes.
And you notice that Ernest would scratch his arms and his stomach, right?
Yes.
And again, that's a symptom of a heroin user.
Yes.
Moment to confer, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hitchcock, you were just asked some questions about Barry. Why did you give Mr. Ayers Barry's phone number?
When I went to speak with Mr. Ayers, he was looking for some, good marijuana, and that's why I gave it to him, because I do marijuana, and I think he just wanted to be less stressed.
What did you think marijuana would do for Mr. Ayers?
I mean, maybe just put him at ease. Like I said, I knew he was a talented actor. I knew he was perfectly capable of doing it. I mean, that's why I hired him. But that first day, he was just a little stressed out and nervous.
Did you ever pay Barry for anything regarding Mr. Ayers?
I was going to, but I didn't end up paying him anything.
Now, Mr. Hitchcock, you just answered some questions about symptoms that plaintiff's counsel asked you about. What did you contribute those symptoms to?
Well, again, Mr. Ayers really was acting well, and I could tell that he was immersing himself in the role. And, I thought he was just really identifying with the character.
Nothing further. Thank you, Mr. Hitchcock.
Recross.
No, Your Honor.
All right. The witness is excused. Next witness.
Your Honor, we call Ms. Delaney Gold Diamond to the stand.
Okay. You may inquire.
Ms. Golddiamond, could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Delaney Golddiamond.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a talent agent.
For those in the jury that don't know, can you describe what a talent agent is?
Yeah, so basically I work as that middleman between actors and either like theater companies or directors, producers, that kind of thing. I help connect the two.
How many offices do you have for this agency?
I currently have two.
Where are those located?
I have one in New York and then another out in LA.
How did you come to start the one in New York?
So in New York, I started pretty much right after I graduated from school. I started working at a talent agency as an assistant, worked my way up. It was a pretty big talent agency, ended up becoming a talent agent and later broke off and started my own agency, Precious Talent.
Now, how did you come to start the one in LA?
So it was because I expanded into the film industry. I connected with Avery Hitchcock. Actually, he started using some of my actors in some of his movies, and that expansion into film really just expanded my agency.
Ms. Golddiamond, let's move on to your relationship with Ernest Ayers. When did you first meet Ernest?
I met Ernest pretty soon after he graduated from college. So that was in 2014.
And what exactly was your relationship with him?
I was his talent agent.
How long were you his talent agent?
We worked together up until he passed away.
Near the beginning of his career, what kinds of roles were you getting, Mr. Ayers?
So he started out mainly on the stage doing stage productions. He was in one smaller movie and did some commercials on radio and TV, just kind of minor roles typically.
Was his career successful at this point?
No, at first I would say no. He worked really hard, but he wasn't cutting it at first, no.
Why is that?
It's really hard to put your finger on it. He was an extremely talented actor. He had, he was a great actor, a great singer. He had a great look. But that's just so normal in the industry. So he wasn't getting major roles.
Let's move on to talk about what you knew about Ernest's addiction. When did you first learn that Ernest was addicted to heroin?
I found out in 2016, just because he had started missing auditions, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't like him at all. So I reached out to his wife and she told me.
What did you and Mr. Ayers do in response?
So Jackie and I decided to host an intervention. We got some of Ernest's closest friends and family and had an intervention.
At this intervention, did you see Ernest while he was high on heroin?
I did.
What did he look like?
He had that dry red skin. His eyes were like sunken in and looked empty. He had really dirty hair. Looked like he hadn't showered in a while. When he first came in, I could tell he was still high. He was euphoric and then he just crashed.
Now, after this intervention, did Ernest seek help?
He did. He went to rehab the next day.
Who's the one who recommended this rehab center?
I did.
After Ernest went to rehab, what was he like?
He was back to his old self. He came out ready to work. He was completely sober. It was a big change.
Let's move on to when he got this role in Cobain. When did you first learn he got the lead role?
So I found out from another talent agent that they were interested in using Ernest, Carrie Bricker.
Did you receive any commission for Ernest getting this role?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
I wasn't the one that represented Ernest in receiving this role, so Carrie Bricker got the commission.
Were you upset by this?
At first I was frustrated for sure. Ernest and I had worked together a long time, but I had no reason to be upset. Carrie Bricker was the one that found him the role.
Now, when is the next time you saw Ernest Ayers?
I saw him when I flew out to LA while he was filming.
Did you see him on set?
I did. I briefly watched him on set.
Did you have any suspicions about his appearance on set?
No, I didn't have any suspicions.
And then where did you go afterwards?
Afterwards, we went to dinner.
And again, at this dinner, did you have any suspicions about Ernest's appearance?
Again, I wouldn't call them suspicions. I mean, at dinner, I thought he looked tired. He had the red eyes and he just looked a little beat from long days of filming on a big movie, a big production. But I wasn't suspicious. I didn't think anything of it.
How similar was his appearance from 2016 when you saw him high on heroin to that dinner you were at with him in 2019?
You cannot compare the two. He looked nothing the same. Yeah, he did not look anything like he did in 2016.
Based on what you saw in 2016 and at that dinner, was Ernest using heroin during the time in LA?
No, I did not think so at all.
I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mrs. Golddiamond. I want to ask you some questions about the person who actually acted as Ernest's agent during this film, Carrie Bricker. She came to you on behalf of Avery Hitchcock, didn't she?
She called me, yes.
And when she did, she asked you 3 questions.
Yes, that's true.
She asked about Ernest's acting,
Yes,
about his singing,
yes,
and about any history of drug use.
yes.
And after that, Avery Hitchcock hired Ernest on the spot.
Yes, I believe that's what happened.
He didn't need any audition.
That's true. He saw him in a play, but no audition.
Now, in May of 2019, Ernest moved to California to film Cobain. You weren't there that entire month.
No,
And you weren't there the first 3 weeks in June when they began filming.
I was not.
And when you finally did arrive, you only spent 3 hours with him,
That's true.
where you noted that he looked distracted
Yes,
with heavy eyes.
yes, he looked very tired.
Now, I want to ask you about some work that your talent agency has done with Hitchcock Studios. Hitchcock Studios reps reached out to you in November of 2020.
Yes,
I know you talked about it a little bit with Mr. Rollinson, but they auditioned 3 of your actors and hired them.
yes,
And this relationship is what quadrupled your business revenue.
yes,
And you received a commission from each of these actors.
I did.
In fact, you received $100,000 worth of commission.
Yes,
This allowed you to open a new office in LA.
I did.
It allowed you to make some new connections in the film industry.
Yes,
In fact, you owe your start to Avery in the film arena.
yeah, connections definitely help.
And now you're here testifying on behalf of Hitchcock Studios.
I'm really here just to tell the truth of what happened, what I saw.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Golddiamond, I just have one question for you. Did you have anything to gain by not helping Ernest back in 2019?
Absolutely not. I mean, first of all, Ernest was just getting his start in the film industry. He was just, I mean, and his career really was just taking off. But beyond that, Ernest was a friend. I consider him and Jackie good friends. I wish things were different for sure.
I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. The witness is excused. Any other witnesses?
No, Your Honor, the defense rests.
If there's nothing else by the plaintiff, then we'll take another 5-minute break. And no,
Your Honor, could we get a quick time check before closing arguments?
I'll put those time checks in the chat. Plaintiff has used 43:24, so you have 16 and a half minutes remaining. Defense has used 40:30, so you have 19:30 remaining.
Thank you.
okay. So with that, we'll take a 5-minute break. It's now 4:24, so we'll be returning right around 4:29. Let me know when everyone's back.
Okay, could the jurors and evaluators please turn on your video one last time so I can make sure everyone's back? And or message me in the chat. Evaluators, you could turn off your cameras. Thank you.
Okay. So it's now time for closing arguments. We'll begin. Are we ready to go? Okay. It's now time for closing arguments. We'll begin with the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor.
Before you begin, at this time, we recommend that everyone switch to speaker view, which is found in the upper right-hand corner.
May it please the court, counsel, and the members of the jury. Just a little longer. You are Kurt. Those are the words of the defendant. Now you saw today, this case is all about Mr. Avery Hitchcock and his influence over young actors, his ability to convince these young actors to perform awfully dangerous tasks, and his greed to make his name larger than life. What's the cost? The life of a young man, Ernest Ayers. A bizarre technique with an unhinged director, a director that, as you saw today, puts his actors in life-threatening positions. See, Mr. Ayers, he wasn't the first to be subjected to this mad, reckless method, but he's the one that paid the ultimate price. And now we're left with a widow. Despite what we heard today and earlier, it wasn't the disease that caused the death of Ernest Ayers. It was the defendant's desperation, disregard, and his danger. It was the desperation of the defendant to get one more blockbuster film, the disregard, the safety of his actors, and the danger of this awful, reckless method acting. And you heard earlier today, and it's true, we carry the burden in this case. We brought the claim of wrongful death by way of negligence, and we had to prove this to you by preponderance of the evidence. And all that means is we had to show you that it's more likely than not that Hitchcock Studios, by way of Avery Hitchcock, is in some way to blame and led to the death of Ernest Ayers. And negligence, that's just a fancy way of saying you're not acting as a reasonable person should in a similar situation. And this negligence, it's got to cause harm. Members of the jury, I think we can agree we got plenty of that. When coming to your decision later on today, we highlight a few key pieces of evidence. First, that the defendant knowingly hired a controllable, vulnerable young actor. Second, that the defendant made this actor do this method acting. And third, that Ernest, he didn't have a choice. And you heard it today. You saw it throughout the testimony that Ernest was a man with a vision. He was a man making his name in the movie industry. And you heard it from Mr. Hitchcock himself. He said Ernest was amazing. But you must consider this first piece of evidence, the fact that he knowingly hired a controllable young man. You see, at the time of the Cobain film, Ernest was raw. He didn't have all the experience of a Matthew McConaughey or a Jennifer Lawrence, but you saw today that's exactly why Avery Hitchcock hired him. You see, Avery knew that he could get Ernest for cheap, but most importantly, he knew he could get Ernest to do whatever he wanted. Ernest was vulnerable. Ernest was controllable. And that brings us to our second piece of evidence, the fact that the method, it is the madness. Now, we heard the defense all day trying to explain the decisions of Mr. Hitchcock, and one of them being that Ernest, he did this all to himself. As you learned today, Ernest was a 3-year survivor of addiction, the worst disease of them all. And it was a tough chapter in Ernest's life, a weakness. It was something he struggled with. But you learned today that Mr. Avery Hitchcock, he saw this struggle. And he wanted to expose this weakness to the benefit of one person, Avery Hitchcock. You see, Hitchcock was obsessed with method acting. He used his influence to get these young and inexperienced actors to do things that no person should do. Examples like you heard today from Chandler Matz. He told you that the defendant made an actor jump out of a moving car into an 80-foot free fall. He starved an actor until they were gone, frail. And now he pushes an actor to take a syringe and poison his body. He didn't do this because it'll make the performers better, despite the defense's argument, or jumping to your death will put you on the Forbes list, or putting a syringe to your arm will make you an A-list actor. No, he did this because he knew he could get away with it. And if he can convince these young actors to take these incredible leaps, have another Oscar right up there on the shelf. A prior drug addict to play the role of Kurt Cobain. Some may say that's reckless. Maybe a reasonable person would say that's sheer negligence. But Hitchcock, he saw it as brilliance. And then, members of the jury, we can't forget about the contract where the defendant promises not to ask any performer to do anything that exposes them to unreasonable risk of harm. Expose them to unreasonable risk of harm, members of the jury? It's not reasonable to pressure this young man and push him to method act and require him to use heroin. That's negligence. And then we have the note. The note found in Ernest trailers 2 days after the first day of shooting. In his first shoot, in his first major day in Hollywood, when everyone on set, every actor, actress, makeup artist, producer, the stylist, they're all on set to watch. And Ernest, he doesn't do his best. Yet Hitchcock pushes him once more and makes him do it 62 times. So what's the answer? Read up, rest up, and read your scripts, kid? No. Hitchcock has a different idea. Ernest must do method acting, and Ernest must do heroin if he wants to properly portray Kurt Cobain. To find Kurt, you have to let Ernest go. Call 555-651-1892. He'll help you find him. Now, the defense has told us today, and they're probably going to say it again when I sit down, that this number is for marijuana. But as we learned, members of the jury, it's California. Weed is legal. If Hitchcock thought the answer to and Ernest performing better was to roll up a blunt, then Ernest could have just walked down the street and popped into the first dispensary he saw. But don't be fooled, because we know now that's not the case. Because this note was for a heroin dealer that Hitchcock wants Ernest to connect with to help him find Kurt Cobain by injecting heroin into his veins. Now, not only does Hitchcock give the number of a drug dealer paired with a syringe, but he offers to pay for these drugs. Now, the defense, they want to hide the facts that they were feeding this vulnerable young man deadly drugs by saying it's for weed. But when we apply our common sense, members of the jury, we know that's not the case. Because before this note, there were no symptoms of drug use. No one took the stand and told you before this note that Ernest looked drawn out. These are valuable common sense, and when you do, it's clear. This note is to push Ernest to the edge, to help him find Kurt Cobain through method acting by reintroducing this vulnerable young man to an addictive chemical. And after the note, we see the effects. Ernest was tired. He was flushed in the face. Ernest was drawn out because he was on drugs. To use the words of Miss Hughes, he was pressured to use drugs to please his hotshot Hollywood director, Avery Hitchcock. Now, we heard from Chandler Matz, Jackie Ayers, Delaney Golddiamond. We heard from every single witness, including the defendant, Avery Hitchcock, that Ernest showed these symptoms. He looked terrible. Ernest was physically deteriorating, and everyone saw it. It was obvious Ernest was using again. And what did the defendant do about it? Nothing. Now, the defense can say all they want that Ernest was just playing the role of Kurt Cobain, and that's why he looked so bad. But Chandler Matz only saw him on set. He only saw Ernest portraying Kurt Cobain. And he thought things were so bad that he had to approach Avery Hitchcock and say, hey, your lead actor is on drugs. And what did Avery Hitchcock say? Well, Kurt Cobain did heroin. And then we have the medical journal from UCLA. He actually looked like he was on drugs, members of the jury. He wasn't just playing his role. And Hitchcock, he did nothing about it. He just told you himself when he took the stand that he saw the symptoms. When I asked him if he had a drawn out face, and if that's a symptom that he saw in Exhibit 13 of a verified medical journal, he said yes. He had the drawn out face, the vacant eyes, the low energy. So what does Hitchcock do knowing all this and acknowledging the symptoms? Turns a cold shoulder. There was no concern, there was no care, there was absolutely no measures taken to ensure the safety of Ernest Ayers. Now, lastly, don't buy the argument that Ernest had a choice here and that every actor has a choice, because here, simply, Ernest didn't. Because Ernest had no choice. This was his big break in Hollywood. He needed this job. He wouldn't be able to provide for his family as barista number 2. So he had to follow the lead and the direction and succumb to the pressure of the most influential man in Hollywood for 16 years running, Avery Hitchcock. As a result, we're here today. As of June 21st, we're without a friend, without a coworker, most importantly, without a husband. Members of the jury, when you're shown this verdict form by your honor, you're going to have to make some decisions here, and the decision's clear. You see, we don't have to show that Avery Hitchcock handed the needle to Ernest Ayers. We just have to show you he provided him with the means, the money, and the method to use heroin and exploit the addiction that Hitchcock knew about since 2018, the very first time he met Ernest. And when you look at the facts, when you look at the evidence, and when you apply your common sense, we'll all come full circle. You'll see that the only reasonable conclusion, supported by these facts and supported by the law, is that Ernest Ayers' death was caused by Hitchcock Studios' negligent behavior. Find Hitchcock Studios and Avery Hitchcock liable for the sad, fortunate death of Ernest Ayers.
Thank you. Defense?
May it please the court. You shouldn't blame someone for something they did not do. In this case, it wasn't the acts of Hitchcock Studios. It wasn't the decisions of Mr. Hitchcock. It was addiction. It was Ernest Ayers' addiction to heroin that ultimately killed him. Members of the jury, we appreciate your time and attention today. Today was not an easy day, and we all sympathize with Mr. Ayers, and there's nothing wrong with that. That means that you're a good human being. Today, however, is not about how badly we feel. Today is about ensuring someone isn't blamed for something they did not do. Because today is about if plaintiff's counsel can prove to you that Ernest Ayers' death was caused by Hitchcock Studios' negligence. Now, as opposing counsel just said, in a few minutes, the judge is going to give you a verdict form. And now this is what you're going to use to ensure that someone isn't blamed for something they didn't do. I expect the first question on your form will look like this. Was Ernest Ayers' death caused, at least in part, by Hitchcock Studios' negligence? Now, from the start of this trial, the plaintiffs had the burden of proof. This means that they had to show you that Hitchcock Studios was negligent in causing Ernest Ayers' death. The jury instructions are going to explain negligence. It's going to tell you that a person's negligence caused a harm if the harm would not have occurred but for the negligence. And two, the harm was a reasonably foreseeable result of their negligence, and that a harm may have more than one cause. Now, the plaintiffs had to prove this to you to be more likely true than not. They had to show you that Ernest Ayers' death would not have occurred but for the acts of Hitchcock Studios. They had to show you that the death of Ernest Ayers was a reasonably foreseeable as a result of their negligence. Now, the evidence today has led you to the answer to question one being no, because it wasn't the director, it was the disease. Because you answered no to question one, the judge is going to instruct you that you don't even need to answer questions 2 or 3. Mr. Ayers was a recovering heroin addict, and he relapsed. As you heard today, Mr. Ayers became addicted to heroin in 2016. He was under stress from his career, and he turned to heroin. Unfortunately, Mr. Ayers became addicted. You heard here today, he wanted to stop using, but he couldn't Mr. Ayers was able to get clean after his friends and family staged an intervention, and he checked into rehab for 2 months. As you heard, Mr. Ayers got sober, but this didn't mean that his fight with addiction was now over. Because as any addict will tell you, once an addict, always an addict. So Mr. Ayers started going to NA meetings. He got a sponsor. He started celebrating his sobriety with his wife and built a support system to rely on in New York. He built pillars to support his continued sobriety. He fell into a routine and he stayed clean. In 2019, Mr. Ayers left behind his support system to chase after his lifelong dream. He saw the future of his career within arm's reach, and he took it, no matter the consequence. Unfortunately, the stress of his breakout role started to get to Mr. Ayers. And once again, he found himself facing the stress of his career. This time, however, it was away from the pillars of support he had built in New York. He was in LA, alone, and he turned to something familiar. He began to use heroin again. Today, plaintiffs' counsel want you to blame Hitchcock Studios for a relapse. Now, you heard from Mr. Jackie Ayers today, who told you that Mr. Ayers was experiencing the same stress he experienced in 2016 that led him to use heroin for the first time. Now, you also saw an article. Now, this article was admitted by both parties, and they agreed to it. They both used it. And in this article, it told you that relapse is frequent, especially when someone is stressed, depressed, or experiencing trouble at home or at work. As we established today, Mr. Ayers was experiencing stress at work. Plaintiffs' counsel want you to believe that as a director, Mr. Hitchcock pushed Mr. Ayers to use heroin again and preyed upon his addiction. They told you today that they think Mr. Hitchcock sought out Mr. Ayers not for his ability, but his vulnerability, that Mr. Hitchcock pushed an addict to use again. However, plaintiffs' counsel's entire version of events today is dependent upon Mr. Hitchcock knowing that Mr. Ayers had an addiction. But the only proof they offered that to you today was testimony from Mr. Ayers. He said that Mr. Ayers told Mr. Hitchcock about his addiction at their lunch. But you also heard him tell you that he would have never wanted Mr. Ayers to be in a situation where he might use heroin again. So if this conversation had actually happened, Mr. Ayers would have never said, yes, of course, to this role when Ernest Ayers asked him for his permission. Now, plaintiffs' counsel also want to use the statements of Ms. Gold Diamond telling Carrie Bricker of Ernest's addiction as notice to Mr. Hitchcock, but they can't show you that this information ever got relayed to Mr. Hitchcock because it didn't happen. Plaintiffs did not bring Ms. Bricker to you to testify and think about all the reasons a potential employer would ask if someone had a drug problem. They couldn't bring you anyone other than Mr. Matz to testify about concerns and Mr. Ayers' changed behavior. They told you, or Mr. Matz told you that he went to Mr. Hitchcock concerned about his behavior, but Mr. Hitchcock told you that that never happened. And further, they couldn't use any testimony to tell you that Mr. Hitchcock knew of Ernest Ayer's previous addiction. Now, when we put on our case for you today, we first brought you Mr. Hitchcock to tell you that it wasn't the director. Plaintiff's counsel can't show you that Mr. Hitchcock caused Mr. Ayer's death. Plaintiffs told you that this was about Mr. Hitchcock trying to get just one more blockbuster film, but it makes no sense for Mr. Hitchcock to want his lead actor addicted to heroin. As you heard Mr. Hitchcock tell you today, the film has been scrapped. Plaintiff's counsel also just told you that actors didn't have a choice to use method acting. But their own witness, Chandler Matz, told you that actors have a choice. It's ultimately their decision. And Mr. Hitchcock told you the exact same thing. Mr. Hitchcock couldn't have taken advantage of a disease that he didn't even know Mr. Ayers had. Mr. Hitchcock gave his actor the number of someone who could get him some weed. Now, plaintiff's counsel tries to prove to you that this note was for a heroin dealer because Ernest Ayers could go get weed from a dispensary. Now, they need you to assume that this note wasn't what it was. And they need you to assume that it wasn't Mr. Hitchcock offering someone from out of town the number of a weed dealer. They need you to assume it wasn't what it was because they can't give you any evidence to prove to you that it wasn't what Mr. Hitchcock said it was. Mr. Hitchcock saw an actor who was stressed out and asked him for some weed. So he gave him the number of a guy who could get him some weed. Mr. Hitchcock didn't know that weed wasn't actually what Ernest Ayers' addiction craved, because it wasn't the director. It was the disease. Now, after you heard from Mr. Hitchcock, you heard from Ms. Gold Diamond, who told you about Mr. Ayers' addiction, about his career, about the role itself. Ms. Gold Diamond told you that she herself couldn't tell you that Mr. Ayers was using heroin. Now, as I just discussed, Mr. Matz told you a different story today, but let's think about who was in a better position to determine if Mr. Ayers was using heroin. Mr. Matz, who had only known Mr. Ayers for less than a month and who had only ever seen him playing a character who was high on heroin, or Miss Gold Diamond, who knew Ernest Ayers as an actor, who had known Mr. Ayers for years, who had seen him high in 2016 and was the very same woman who checked him into rehab. Now, you also saw the autopsy today. That autopsy showed you that Ernest Ayers' death was caused by heroin. It told you that the cause of death was cardiac arrest from a heroin overdose. It also told you that at the time of Mr. Ayers' death, he had 9 wounds that were consistent with injection marks that were up to 5 days old. Now, plaintiffs cannot show you that Ernest Ayers ever received heroin from Mr. Hitchcock. They could not show you that Mr. Hitchcock ever asked Ernest Ayers to use heroin. They could not show you that Mr. Hitchcock knew Ernest Ayers was struggling with his addiction. Unfortunately, only Ernest knew about his struggles. He even lied to his own husband about using again. Jackie Ayers told you today that her husband had relapsed, but that he was hiding it from him. He told him he was just in character. Because after all, Ernest Ayers was playing a character who was a heroin addict. And as an addict who relapsed, he had the perfect cover. Someone should not be blamed for something they did not do. Hitchcock Studios should not be blamed for a relapse. And that is why you should answer no to question 1. Because it wasn't the director. It was the disease. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now it's time for the jury instructions, or are we doing a rebuttal?
Your Honor, may I use the remainder of my time? I don't believe it's much for a brief.
Okay. All right, so it's time for the rebuttal argument. Go ahead.
Now, members of the jury, we got to pay attention to the details. And I want to state here that despite what we've heard from the other side here, we have a husband here, not a wife. Mr. Jackie Ayers is a man, and he lost his husband. And when we pay attention to these details or absence thereof, we see what's wrong with Avery Hitchcock. He didn't pay attention to these details. As we just heard, we both used Exhibit 13, and on that exhibit was the symptoms of heroin use, not the symptoms of what somebody looks like when they're playing a character, the symptoms of real heroin use. And Mr. Avery Hitchcock, he agreed to all of them. He said Ernest had the flushed face, he had vacant eyes, and he looked drawn out. He saw these details. And what did he do? Nothing. So it's not blaming something for what they didn't do. That's exactly what happened here. Avery Hitchcock didn't do anything when he saw these symptoms of heroin in young Ernest Ayers. And addiction, it's just fuel without another day of recovery. And June 21st, it would be considered a hard-fought day of sobriety for Ernest, but that wasn't the case, as we saw, because Avery Hitchcock fueled his addiction. He fueled it through what he did do. The napkin that he wrote and gave to Ernest Ayers. The pressure to method act. The syringe left in Ernest's trailer. Quote, just a little longer, you are Kurt Cobain. Members of the jury, this is the fuel to his addiction. This is what Avery Hitchcock did to earn the blame of the early death of a young, talented man in Ernest Ayers. Find Hitchcock Studios, Avery Hitchcock, 100% liable for the unfortunate early death of Ernest Ayers.
Okay, thank you. Now I believe it's time for closing arguments. Is that right?
Your Honor, I'll share the jury instructions now so you can read those to the jury.
Okay, great. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is your duty to determine the facts from the evidence and apply the law to those facts. Evidence consists of witness testimony and exhibits the court received. Opening statements and closing arguments are not evidence, and you should disregard any argument made by the attorneys not based on the evidence. You must disregard testimony and exhibits the court has excluded. Evidence received for a limited purpose must be considered only for that purpose. You should consider all evidence in light of common sense and your own experience in life. Only you are the judges of the witness's credibility and the weight to give their testimony. You may consider the witness's ability and opportunity to observe, their memory, their manner while testifying, any interest, bias, or prejudice they may have, and the reasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case. When a party has a burden to prove an element, it must prove that element is more likely true than not true. The plaintiff has the burden of proving that Ernest Ayers' death was caused, at least in part by the defendant's negligence. The defendant had the burden of proving that Ernest Eyer's death was caused at least in part by Ernest Eyer's own negligence. Negligence is a failure to act in a way that a reasonable person would under the same circumstances to prevent harm to themselves or others. A person's negligence caused a harm if, one, the harm would not have occurred but for the negligence, and two, the harm was a reasonably foreseeable result of their negligence. A harm may have more than one cause. If you find that Ernest Eyer's death was caused by both the defendant's negligence and Mr. Eyer's own negligence, you will be asked to apportion liability between those two causes. Your apportionment must total 100%. Okay. All right, will the bailiff take charge of the jury?
Yes, Your Honor. So evaluators, at this time, please complete your ballots and submit them using the form. And jurors, please complete your verdict forms. You should have received those in the email that you were sent. If you have any trouble locating your ballot or your form, please let me know and I can send that to you. And at this point, we will wait for all of the ballots to be submitted before we proceed to comments. Your Honor, you are welcome to head out. You are also welcome, of course, to stick around. And once we get the go ahead for comments, you can give any comments that you have to the competitors.
Okay, I think I'll stick around. I'm interested to see what the verdict is.
Okay, I will let everyone know when we have the green light to proceed to comments. Okay, we now have everyone's forms. So everyone is welcome to come back on camera. And any evaluators and jurors who would like to give feedback to the competitors, you can turn on your camera We will ask that everyone limit their comments to maybe 1 or 2 minutes so that the competitors have time to get something to eat before closing ceremonies. We will begin with Your Honor, Judge Choi, when you are ready.
Well, I just want to say it was this is the presentations of the trial and the evidence was fantastic. You know, I've done about a dozen trials since I've been a judge, and I just wish all my attorneys were as articulate and as prepared as all of you were. Just a great job, everybody.
Juror Strong, go ahead.
No, I just want to say great job, guys. I was going to say that one thing that felt hard for me to understand as a jury member, not hard to understand, but one thing I kept getting caught up on was the language of like but for and the explanation of negligence, not in like not understanding it, but in that like I would have found the studio entirely negligent or entirely liable for the negligence. I think had that been explained a bit differently, because the thing for me was like, oh, we can't say but for, because like had he not gotten this role, he would have been in the exact same circumstances as when he initially started dealing with heroin in the first place in the earlier years. So like something to sort of like soften that or maybe make it more digestible, I think would have been really helpful, because that was like my personal hang up.
Thank you.
Evaluator Hirsch, did you wish to give comments?
Yes, I can't start my video.
That's okay. You can just go ahead and give comments without video.
Okay. All right, I'll do that. First of all, I want to just commend everybody and what a great job you all did. Is it appropriate to ask what schools the two teams are from, or is that not able to be asked at this time?
Yeah, we ask that you avoid that. You are welcome, of course, to reach out to Mr. Bernstein if you would like that information.
I will avoid that. I think that frankly, one of the facts I think maybe could have been used more effectively was the fact that there was a burner phone used, and if the telephone number that was given was a burner phone, which would be something that would be disposed of upon it's being used, it might be a factor to show that the producer Hitchcock thought it was something illegal or more than just his marijuana connection. I think that Hitchcock did a great job as a witness. My daughter went to NYU Film School and has been in the industry for many years. I've never seen a producer as compassionate as this guy appeared to be in this case. And I think because of the testimony that he gave, he came across as someone who was not reckless and not someone who was out to take a young person and drive them into some kind of addictive behavior. So that person did a great job. I think the examination by both sides of all the parties was terrific. And wherever you're from, congratulations on a job well done. I just retired after 52 years of trial practice. And I will say this, that I have seen few attorneys who are any better than the two sides in this case. So congratulations. And those of you who want to go on to law, I think you have a great future ahead of you.
Evaluator Cotter, go ahead.
All right, thanks everyone. This was a lot of fun. Really great trial, just a great display of, I think, skill, talent, and advocacy all around. Just background real quick. I'm a public defender in Alameda County in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. Did mock trial through high school, law school, college. I guess I'm on the other end of the spectrum from Mr. Hirsch. I just started practicing about a year ago. So doing trials, of course, but not with that much experience, but perhaps I can provide a little different perspective. I thought that there was some really good just points made, even not considering it in the context of how I scored, but I thought that the fact that you really, I think, took different facts in the case that were provided to you that were not highlighted in the way that I saw in the other round that I evaluated. I thought it was really clever to see sort of the way that you put your own spin on both sides of the case. I know that your 4 guaranteed rounds are over, but I'm going to try to keep my comments relevant to anything for future use and competitions. Just a couple takeaways real quick. The first one is, let's see. don't bury the lead. A lot of times, I think you made some great points, but you just ran right over them. Witness landed a killer point and you said, okay, moving on to this less consequential thing. Really make sure the jury resonates with that point, or make sure it lands with them and sticks with them, because there were some really, I think, just fantastic points that went overstated. And, you know, it goes also to the presentation of how you present it, how you say it, because I think there were points where you basically said or delivered the fact in the same way that you did maybe an introductory question that we don't really care about, other than, okay, this is someone we can trust. So if you really, those key points that you want to leave the jury with that you think are operative or will dictate their decision, make sure those are the things that they're left with as a matter of impression. For visuals, I appreciated the use of visual aids, you know, the photos, the contracts, the highlighted text. Just be wary of over text heavy slides, overusing them. If you do, make sure that, you know, you're highlighting the specific portions. And there was a certain amount of that, but I felt like when you highlighted the big part that you cared about, you took down the slide within a second or two. Let it stay up there maybe for a question or two more, so that way it sticks with us what you're doing. Otherwise, it's just a series of slides that are going through the motions and it doesn't really resonate with us, right? The goal is to have that sticking power that stays with the jury once you submit it for their consideration and they're deliberating, I guess, in real life and deliberating here on their ballots. But make sure that you leave the impressions with them that you want them to have when they go back to deliberate. And then the last thing is just, I think, again, those really good points could have benefited. And I don't know if the jurors felt the same way. They probably have a better perspective of it since they're coming in fresh, but really giving them some framework or some structure, some organization. Because again, I just felt like there were so many great points, but sometimes they were getting lost in the shuffle and the transitions. And so if you could just organize things, whether it doesn't have to be chronologically, but topically or serially, whatever it is for you. I think that would really benefit a juror in a case like this, where there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of, you know, nuance in the details. And you really, you were in the weeds and you pull that out. Now it's time to remember, you know, the forest level that our jurors are going to see. So really great job. I had a lot of fun watching this. Good luck. I hope, you know, one or both of these teams makes the break rounds. Good luck going forward, and maybe see you at another competition or something in the future. Congrats.
Evaluator Wright, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Matt Wright. I'm an education law attorney and pretty long time mock trial coach. I don't have a lot of critique here. I watched a round yesterday, scored a round yesterday, and I scored a round today. And these are my first law school rounds. And, you know, one of the things I had remarked about yesterday is, you know, seeing by law school, I mean, you guys are so good that it lends itself to a very clean trial. There's not a lot of objectionable material. So there's not a lot of objections. There was only one in the last trial. And I think there was only one or two in today's trial. I did feel like there was a couple of questions regarding some of the, you know, conclusions about whether or not he was on, you know, heroin at the time. You know, the people, it seemed that may have been, you know, speculative in nature. So I would make sure, you know, you're taking a look at that. But beyond that, I would just I would echo Mr. Cotter that there were some really great points that kind of were, I felt like, delivered in, you know, in the same way as a lot of the foundational points. And so, I mean, you guys are all fantastic. You are almost too smooth, I think, you know, in some ways. So just, you know, really, you know, punching some of those salient points, I think you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, because you've gotten to a point where I think the scores are going to be so close. You're just looking for little things to differentiate. And I think that's where you can differentiate yourself is really delivering on some of those points that, you know, are coming out, letting them really hang in the air or wrapping back around or something to reinforce those for your jury and for the scores, I think would be well received. So excellent job, everyone involved, and thank you for having us. Good luck.
And evaluator Waziri.
Hi, everyone. I thought you all did great. Just a little bit of background. I did mock trial in undergrad and in law school at UCLA, and I also coach. Now I'm going to piggyback off of what everyone else has been saying. There were some really great points here, and I think it would have benefited from a little bit more of, you know, drama. I noticed some of you are sitting down, and a really good way of making a point stick is to stand up and use your virtual courtroom, right? Slow down, pause, really make that point stick. And if you're finding that you have so much to say and that you don't have enough time to really make those points, I would suggest cutting out some of, just trimming the fat off of your case. There were some really important points that I didn't really understand until the closings. For example, plaintiff, you said that marijuana is legal in California. You don't need a burner phone. I think in your cross-examination, you should have really hit that point home. You don't need a drug dealer to get weed in California anymore. You only need it to get the harder stuff. And for Ms. Hughes, I really loved your closing, but I really wish you would have brought that dynamics that you have in your closing to the rest of everything you did. You were very passionate, you were very emotive, and that is what makes a jury listen, and it makes everything more digestible. But overall, I think you guys did really great job.
Okay, well, thank you to everyone, to the competitors. Thank you for a fantastic weekend of performances, to the jurors, the evaluators, and especially to Judge Cho. Thank you all for volunteering your time. We couldn't have done this without you. If anyone else wants to offer feedback or whatever, you are welcome to stick around. But at this point, everyone is welcome to take off and enjoy the rest of their Sunday.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good round, guys. It was fun.
Great job.